Right.
We put on our promise.
Oh, no, it's free for the taking.
You get your seat back. I'll go there.
Yeah, because I misspelled our friends. Well,
You know, I don't think they're not thinking, I didn't know which two. They.
Oh, the handshake.
All right, I am told we are good, so we're gonna go ahead and dive in. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. The time is 5:09 on September 7th, 2022. And this meeting of the District of Columbia State Board of Education is now called. This month's working session is being held in person at the Marion S. Berry Junior Building. However, in-person attendance at our working session is limited to members and staff of the State Board and invited presenters. The working session is being streamed live on the State Board's YouTube page for members of the public to view and attend. The State Board will return to the old council chambers for our September 21st public meeting later this month. We're very excited to be back in there and plan to maintain our full in-person meeting posture moving forward. The roll will now be called to determine the presence of a quorum. Mr. Green, would you please call the roll?
Lee Bernstead.
Present.
Representative Jones Burgess,
Present.
Representative Wages. Representative Washington,
Present.
Representative Soy,
Present.
Representative Chang,
Present.
Representative Wattenberg,
Present.
Representative O'Leary,
Here.
Representative Parker. President Sutter,
Present.
Vice President Thompson,
Present.
and Representative Reed. And Representative Patterson.
Here.
Madam President, you have quorum.
A quorum has been determined and the State Board will now proceed with our meeting. Welcome to our September 7th working session of the State Board. It's back to school season. It's been a wonderful week plus of public school return here in Washington, D.C. I've seen lots of faces of joy, lots of gratitude from educators, from students, from families. Unfortunately, sadly, for too many of our students, the weeks also began with violence. So we ask, as always, that we keep in mind the students and their families who've been affected by violence at the start of this school year. And we work towards never having that be the way any of our students need to start school again. The State Board is excited to welcome the public back to school with our own fall engagement session for the public. We'll be holding that September 24th at Eastern High School in Ward 7, beginning at 10:30 a.m. and going until 1:30 p.m. Please see the State Board's social media for details and members. You'll see in your folder, we have flyers and assignments for where we are to post and hand out those flyers so that we can get as many members of the public to join us as possible. We will have childcare and food and the chance to engage with State Board of Education members on key priorities for the board. So please come out, help us spread the word Saturday, September 24th at Eastern High School. The State Board also has ads on public transit, so please keep your eyes out for those. We have those ads on WMATA buses, we have them in metro stations and inside buses. We're very excited to be spreading the word about our agency and our opportunities to support the public broadly across DC. There's a QR code on our signs where you can sign up for great news and information from the State Board. Couple more updates on our executive director hiring process. We shared this all with our members and staff earlier this week. We've been lucky to have such a strong pool of candidates who are interested in serving our agency and serving the people and children of our city. We've identified 2 finalists and we'll be working through the remainder of the hiring process over the next few weeks. Leadership looks forward to nominating a new executive director this fall and to putting the nomination to a full board confirmation vote as soon as we possibly can. Finally, I want to issue a few welcomes. The State Board is very excited to welcome 4 student representatives to join us this fall. 1 returning student representative, Representative Bernstadt, and 3 new faces who we are very excited to have sworn in last week and to welcome to the board, Representative Washington, Representative Jones Burgess, and Representative Wages. Welcome to the state board. We're delighted to have you join us. Yeah, look at what that was. It was wonderful to swear them in with so many folks in there like care about them and about their success. We had teachers, principals, parents, college counselors, so many folks who really love all of you and are very excited to see you succeed and serve on this board. Thank you for doing this. And we'd like to welcome our 2 new policy fellows who are already hard at work with the board since mid-August. We have Lauren Dunphy-Kine, who is joining us, and Morelia Fernandez. Welcome to the state board. Thank you for all you're already doing to support our agency and our staff. I will now stop and turn to our executive director, Alex June, for his report.
Thank you, President Sutter. So on my side of things, I have a handful of things to update the board on. As President Sutter said, we are working to resume our in-person posture in the old council chamber. I've been working with both PBS as well as the contractor to make sure that space is ready for our September 21st meeting. The hope is that meeting will be ideally in a hybrid posture, but at the very least, return to the same posture that it was before the pandemic, and then come October, November, and moving into the new fiscal year into a more hybrid posture. President Sutter also noted the back to school event flyers. I do believe Dr. Fleischer, as well as our policy fellow, Morelia Fernandez, put together some packets for members. So please make sure to take a look at those. There are some maps with, I think, 4 to 5 specific locations that we've asked members to post flyers, deliver flyers at. So it'd be really, really helpful if you could do that. But I think amongst staff and members will be able to get the word out. On that, I know the sign up just started, but we have had 20 folks sign up already. Most folks are parents and community members. There are folks that have already indicated that they will need childcare provided. I think Ward 7 and Ward 3 are coming in with the most at this time. And folks are really excited about our 4 sessions that we'll be offering. So I wanted to provide that update. Members should also have received emails about the upcoming NASB conference. I know some members and staff will be attending that. I did also want to note that the state board did have 2 presentations accepted for that session. And so we look forward to presenting those and confirming our attendee list for the NASB annual conference at the end of October. The National History Day, I know this is something that the board was interested in previously, will be running in 2023. And so National History Day has not found a permanent home at this time, but the state board has stepped forward to pay the affiliate fee. And the interim contractor has been hired to run the program for 2023. And I think the hope is that come 2024, either the DC History Center and or the Smithsonian will take on the DC National History Day program. So that's an exciting update. And then the very last thing that I wanted to note are a handful of upcoming council hearings that I think members should be aware of. On September 27th, there will be a hearing related to transcripts and AP exams. On October 6th, there's a hearing related to financial literacy standards. On October 25th, there is a hearing on teacher retention and our teacher data bill. On November 30th, there is a hearing related to attendance. And then on December 7th, there is a literacy hearing, literacy and park and name sport hearing in front of the council. So there is quite a robust activity happening in front of the council before the end of their term. So I think those were all of my updates, President Sutter. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ju. Do members have any questions about the interim executive director's report? Dr. Russo?
Question with you about the you said the History Day, National History Day. We are paying for a third party to run that? I didn't quite understand what our
No, that's a great question. and Representative Floyd. So we are paying the affiliate fee, which largely means that the program will be able to run. The affiliate fee is not quote me, but about $2,500. That will ensure that the program is running. And the state board is also very fortunate that we will be recognized as the affiliate sponsor for the 2023 program. We are not paying for the person who will actually be doing the program. I believe a small stipend is being expended directly from the National History Day program for someone to run it. So we are not paying for that person, or we actually hired her staff.
Okay, good. And as a reminder to members and to the public, National History Day was previously run out of the National Archives, and the person who had been running that program for years, the National Archives decided it would no longer sponsor it. So the opportunity for DC to continue to have a National History Day was contingent on both finding someone to cover the cost of the affiliate fee and someone to cover the cost of staffing it. The state board determined we could not staff it, nor could we cover that cost, but that we could pay that affiliate fee to support this work. Many of us have served as judges for the National History Day project in the past. With our work on the social studies standards, it seemed to be a viable and important way we could help the schools in the district continue that. All right, well, then we get to the meat of the meeting. I am pleased now to turn over the next 75 minutes of our meeting to the Office of the State Superintendent of Education. We have 3 topics, so get ready to dig in. We have an educator workforce report, community service graduation requirement, and the 21-2022 PARC assessment results. The first presentation will welcome Ms. Elizabeth Ross, Interim Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning at OSSE. She will update the state board on OSSE's recent research on the educator workforce in the district. The second presentation will welcome Mr. Andrew Gall, Deputy Chief of Staff for Legislative Affairs and Policy at OSSE. He will seek a sense of the state board on whether regulatory action is required related to the 100-hour community service requirement. He'll present the state board with some background information and with some options to consider. Our final presentation is by Mr. Evan Kramer, Interim Deputy Superintendent of Director of Data Analysis, Research and Reporting at OSSE. He will share the results of the 2021-2022 statewide standardized assessment, our PARC exam. Members will pause for questions after each of the presentations, and I thank Mr. Tooley, Chief of Staff at OSSE, for being with us tonight to also answer any questions. Ms. Ross, Mr. Gall, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Tooley, I turn to you with one final request. A lot of ground to cover. We want to have a substantive discussion with you on each of the topics. So do your best to summarize key points where you can. We promise we'll read the documents. Let's move towards discussion as quickly as we can. Thank you all, and I'll turn to Ms. Ross.
Thank you so much, President Sutter, and thank you everyone for welcoming me here. I hope folks online can hear me. I'm trying hard to project into the owl. It is a real pleasure to be here tonight. As folks who have been on the state board for some time will recall, I met with you multiple times last year and promised that these data were coming. So it's very, very nice to be in a position this year to be sitting here before you and presenting them. If we could advance ahead a few slides. We can go right ahead to slide 4, slide 5. Yeah, so I'm here tonight to talk to our educator workforce data, which OSSE collects and reports a significant amount of every year. From each LEA in the fall, OSSE collects faculty and staff data through our faculty and staff data collection. We do the same from each educator preparation provider in the winter, and we provide those entities with the data that they need to make informed decisions about staffing, about enrollment, about a whole host of different things. Historically, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. Historically, we began releasing some teacher data in fall 2019, and in winter 2022, we knew that there was a lot of concern about teacher retention, in particular during the ongoing pandemic. So we released a short educator retention brief. And then I'll spend the bulk of my time tonight talking about our spring 2022 educator workforce report, which includes data from all LEAs during the 21-22 school year, as well as data from that helps us understand the educator pipeline. I'll start the next two slides, please, by talking about the DC educational landscape. Our DC educational landscape in 21-22 had 8,000 teachers, approximately 200 principals, 1,500 school leaders, 1,000 school service providers, 2,500 paraprofessionals, serving approximately 94,000 students across 70 LEAs and in 250 schools. The largest share, next slide please, of DC students, teachers, and school leaders are Black African American, while the smallest share among identified racial and ethnic categories are Pacific Islander or Native Hawaiian. The data presented on the next two slides will show the number of students, teachers, and school leaders in these racial and ethnic groups are not necessarily proportional across the city, although at the high and low end, the numbers do track each other. Thank you so much. You're doing great, Alexander. For DC teachers by years of experience, we do see a range of teacher experience, and it's notable that these data demonstrate that DC has a somewhat more experienced teacher population than many other jurisdictions nationwide, with approximately a third of our teachers with more than 10 years of experience. Next slide, please. Similarly, we see across DC's school leader population a range of experience, although it trends somewhat more novice, with only about half as many school leaders having more than 10 years of experience as teachers across our jurisdiction. And in case you're curious as to who is encompassed under the definition of a DC leader, school leaders in DC are designated by the LEA. They're school-based employees who are responsible for seeing the operation of a particular school and may include a principal, assistant principal, an individual supervising school operations, assigning duties to staff members, supervising and maintaining records of the school, and coordinating school instructional activities beyond just the principal or the head of school. Next slide, please. This slide shows some really interesting data that help us understand the relationship between the race ethnicity of DC teachers and DC students. As I know folks on this board are well aware, there's a significant body of research demonstrating that benefits accrue to all students, particularly students of color, from having sustained access to a high quality, diverse workforce, including other teachers of color. So in the 2021-22 school year, again, the vast majority of students in DC are identified as Black African American, and the majority of teachers in DC identified as Black African American. But we do see that there is a gap in the rate at which students who are Black African American have access to teachers who look like them. In contrast, if we look at and we see that trend follow in the Hispanic Latino racial category. In contrast, we see more teachers who are white Caucasian as compared to students who are white Caucasian, if we look at the third category there. Next slide, please. Similarly, for DC school leaders by race, ethnicity, and this slide is also cut by gender, so it includes data about whether these individuals are male or female. We see a high level of diversity in the DC school leader population. 63% of our school leaders identify as Black African American, 18% identify as white Caucasian, 10% identify as Hispanic Latino, and 2% identify as Asian. And we see significantly more females in the school leader population than we see males, which is not atypical based on data that we see nationwide. Next slide, please. In terms of DC teacher school vacancies by subject area, and these are in rank order with the lowest number of school vacancies or the fewest number of school vacancies at the top and the largest number at the bottom. In the 21-22 school year, we had 164 vacancies in elementary and 2 vacancies in social studies. So there's a wide range depending on the subject area, which is really important as we think about our workforce needs, because it means that any strategy designed to support and enhance our workforce really must be targeted rather than just blanketed in order to meet our DC LEA needs. It's worth noting that these data are extremely atypical compared to data that we see from other states. Most states see significantly higher shortages in secondary math and secondary science than we see in DC, and it's not common to see vacancy rates in elementary schools at the rates that we do here in DC. So that is certainly worth noting. Next slide, please. Now I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the extent to which students across our city, and particularly in different categories identified by statute under the ESEA, have access to teachers who meet certain metrics come from the ESEA, and those are experienced, in-field, and effective. Across our city, we see at least 9/10 of our teachers are experienced, are in-field, and are effective. And we have specific definitions that we use for each of these terms, which were approved under our ESEA state plan by the U.S. Department of Education. Specifically, an experienced teacher is one that has more than 0 years of experience and who earned a rating higher than ineffective. So if you have 1 year of experience but earned a rating of ineffective in your first year of teaching, you would not be classified as an experienced teacher in your second year because you have that ineffective rating. An in-field teacher is described as one who has a university degree in their field of teaching, an active certification in their field of teaching, or who has demonstrated at least 1 year of effective teaching in their field as measured by the LEA's teacher evaluation system. In BC, each LEA has the authority to operationalize its own teacher evaluation system, which means that this is not necessarily an apples to apples comparison. Finally, we have effective teachers as ones who earn a rating of effective or higher on their LEA evaluation system. Next slide, please. This graph shows the associations between student demographic groups and teacher experience in the 21-20 school year. Although we see slight differences under a regression analysis, none of these differences are statistically significant, which means that this factor, teacher experience, does not describe the different rates at which Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, White, Caucasian, English learners, students with disabilities, or economically disadvantaged students have access to teachers who meet that experienced criterion. Similarly, and next slide, please. We see for teacher effectiveness in the 2021 school year that although there are slight differences, those differences are not statistically significant, which means that the factor, teacher effectiveness, does not describe any meaningful difference in rates at which students who fall into each of these 6 demographic categories have access to teachers who are identified as effective by their LEA. Next slide, please. In contrast, for the in-field teacher qualification, and again, the in-field teacher qualification means an individual who has training in their subject, credential in their subject. We do see significant differences in statistically significant differences in the rates at which students of certain categories have access to in-field teachers. In particular, our students with disabilities category, our Black African American students, and our economically disadvantaged students are statistically less likely to have access to in-field teachers than their Hispanic, Latino, White, Caucasian, and English learner peers. Next slide, please. Now I'll spend some time talking about a topic that I know is of great interest to this body and others, teacher retention. Teacher retention, next slide, please. Thank you. Teacher retention, and this is calculated year over year. So what we did is we looked at at the data that LEAs had submitted in fall 2021, in fall 2020, and we compared it to the data that LEAs submitted in fall 2021 in order to determine whether teachers were retained in their same role at their same school, in which case they are classified as stayers or that green category, whether they stayed in their same role type but moved to a new school, in which case they were classified as a mover, that orange category, whether they were employed in a different role type. So for example, a teacher that may have moved into school administration, gotten a job as an assistant principal or as a principal, and that would be that light orange or peach, and then a leaver, an educator who left the DC public education workforce. These individuals could have remained in education in another state or in a private school, but our data system tracks only individuals who are employed by DC LEAs. Next slide, please. Looking at school leader retention from the 2021 to from the fall 2020 to fall 2021, we see that school leader retention is strong. And again, we have those same 4 categories dividing school leaders into stayers, movers, changers, or leavers. Overall, we see that 86% of school leaders are staying in their school, in their role in fall 2021. 2% are in the same role in a new school, so moving within our DC LEA system. 3% are in a new role type, and then we see 9% that are leaving the DC educator workforce. Next,
Just a quick clarifying question. School leaders, principals only, APs, executive directors, who falls in it?
excellent question. School leader is a robust definition that includes more than principals. So it includes principals, it includes, and I should say, we also provides a definition for each of these terms to LEAs, but there is some level of interpretation at the LEA level. For example, if an LEA doesn't have an assistant principal role, they would not report anyone in that category. So they wouldn't report 0, they just would not report. But it is the individual who is school-based and is in a school leadership position, which would include an assistant principal, wouldn't include a principal. Great question. The next slide shows data that disaggregates teacher retention by board of school. And again, these data are all calculated off the same data points, that fall 2020 to fall 2021. We do see differences across our city at the rates at which both teachers and school leaders are retained. The far left bar in each of the 8 wards shows the rates at which teachers in that ward were retained. The bar just to the right of that shows the rates at which school leaders were retained. Citywide, we see teacher and school leader retention was highest in wards 1, 2, and 3. We see retention was lowest in wards 4, 5, 6, and 7 in between the 2020-21 and 2021-2022 school year. Next slide, please. We also disaggregated data around teacher retention based on, based on teacher and school leader retention based on years of experience. And we saw that, as is perhaps not atypical, that our teachers with the most experience and our school leaders with the most experience were generally more likely to stay than teachers and school leaders in other categories, with 93% of our school leaders with more than 10 years of experience being retained at the same school in the same role, as compared to 89% of school leaders with 0 to 1 year of experience being retained in the same school in the same role. Next slide, please. We further disaggregated our data around DC teacher and school leader retention by race and ethnicity. And again, here we saw variations across different races and ethnicities. Specifically, Asian teachers and school leaders were retained at the highest rates, and teachers and school leaders of 2 or more races were retained at the lowest rates. However, it's important when considering these data to consider them alongside the demographic data that I provided earlier in this conversation, because we do see significant differences in the rates, in the number of individuals, the N of individuals in each of these racial and ethnic categories across the city. Next slide, please. We see significant differences across the city, and this is a slide of which I think many of us around the table can feel very confident that our LEAs are really using their evaluation systems in order to support, promote, and retain their most effective teachers, and provide pathways out of the profession for those teachers who may not be as effective in the classroom. So we see year over year that our most effective teachers are electing to remain in the same school, in the same role, with significantly higher rates of effectiveness for our significantly higher rates of retention for our effective teachers, as compared to those teachers who earn ratings of ineffective in that school year. Next slide, please. At a high level, our spring 2022 educator workforce report, and the link is on the slide, and this report is also publicly available on our website, provides data demonstrating that our workforce is diverse, experienced, and talented. We know that many DC students have access to teachers who match their racial and ethnic background, but we also know that there's still work to be done in this space. And the work that this committee has done to really support our team in thinking about that on the front end by supporting our EPPs in implementing these assessments to ensure that they are recruiting, attracting, enrolling, and supporting through graduation and program completion. Students who match the demographics of our DC student body is really important towards helping ensure that we're able to close those gaps. We also know that students in DC with different demographic characteristics are taught by effective and experienced teachers at similar rates. Although again, we see those statistically different rates for Infield teachers. And we see that most DC teachers who earn ratings of effective or higher remained in their school and in their role in recent years. Next slide, please. As I shared at the outset, these are data that we collect annually. Our annual data collection for all LEAs, we get that opened up. It will open on September 27th of this year. And LEAs will have about 5 weeks in order to provide those data. We'll then work with them to make sure that the data are clean, accurate, and certified by each LEA so that we can confidently bring them forward to the public as we are doing with you here today. We anticipate updating our public-facing educator data files, which are flat data files that the public can actually use to take a look at how these data, which I presented at a high level here, may differ in different LEAs and in different schools. We are also working with our EPPs to collect the EPP data, and we do that just following the faculty and staff data collection in the fall. We'll do it in the winter, and then provide each EPP with an EPP report in the spring, includes comparative citywide data. I went at quite a rapid pace, so I'm going to rely on Alexander to bring us back to any slides that might be helpful as folks have questions. And
Colleagues, we're going to put a total of a 10-minute round for questions and just take member questions as they come up and see how much we can get to in 10 minutes. Sound okay? All right. Representative Bernstein had a question, and I'll come to Dr. Gosway.
Okay, I see slides 15 and 16. I know you said, or sorry. Oh my God, and sorry. Slides something and something with the associations between student demographic groups and teachers' effectiveness.
yep,
I'm looking, I see, and I know you said percent of students with disabilities and other categories are lower for Infield teachers because they're less likely to have access to Infield teachers. Is that all that's reflected in this data, or is this about students that do have access to Infield teachers?
yeah. So thank you very much for that excellent question. This graph describes the likelihood that a student with disabilities will be assigned to a teacher who meets that Infield definition. And what it demonstrates is that there is a statistical difference at the rate at which a student with disabilities is likely to have access to that teacher compared to other categories of students.
Okay, and
Does
is
that make
that,
sense?
yes, is that just Infield as in the subject? And then for students, and I know Infield also mentioned who are trained to be teachers, is that also specific to teaching students with disabilities, or is it just teaching and teaching that subject matter?
Yeah, great question. So really what you're asking about is what the data matching looks like at the LEA for this characteristic. And I think implicit in the question is whether if a student with disabilities is in a general education classroom, and that general education classroom is a social studies classroom, and that class is taught by a credentialed Infield social studies teacher, how would that student with disabilities be classified? And it depends on who the teacher of record is for that student for that course, and the percentage of the students' time that they're spending in that class versus in their students with disabilities class, which varies based on a student with disability, an individual student with disabilities IEP. And so that's information that the LEA provides to us through the faculty and staff data collection, and on based on some work that Evan's team is leading, and we're doing it at the agency. We are working to get closer to actually have those student teacher data linkages on our OSCE end. But right now the LEAs are inputting that data for us.
Thank you.
Dr. Gosway?
Thank you. Okay, first question, I guess, is about the definition of school leaders. I guess it's two parts. My first question is just curious why you decided to put all school leaders together like that, as opposed to just looking at principals. And then I'm wondering if you have also disaggregated that, or if you have data on the principal as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a really interesting policy question for us, and we actually did cut the data both ways because we were really interested in understanding, first, recognizing the important role that individuals in school leadership do to help ensure that the school is successful. And the principal is the captain of the ship, but definitely not the only person contributing to that school's success. And so we cut a lot of our data by looking at the school leadership more broadly, but we did separately disaggregate and presented in our educator retention rate, in particular, retention rate by school principal, because we were very interested in understanding the extent to which the single person charged with school leadership was moving over. So those data are publicly available as well. I don't have them in front of me. They track pretty closely. They differ by about 1 percentage point, maybe 2. But we were very interested in whether we were just going to be different in that particular role. And we didn't see a whole lot of sunshine between that.
Thank you. Representative Walkenberg?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for putting all this together. As you know, we have been eager to get this data, so it's terrific. Thank you very much. So couple questions, short ones and then a longer one. One on, so this is available by the categories that you have. Is it also available? Can people look and see per school, per LEA, by sector? Is that online?
Exactly. So this is available in a comprehensive report, which provides these graphs, and it helps a member of the public who might be interested in the workforce more broadly. But for any individual who's looking for specific data about a single school, we put out Excel data files. We're also doing some work to modify our DC school report cards, which are coming out in early November of this year, to include some additional teacher data, which we know is of great interest to this group, so that parents and families who we know are more likely to look at those comprehensive school report cards than they are to go through an Excel data file. We'll be able to find that.
Are you anticipating that that will include the teacher turnover data, the teacher retention data?
We intend to include teacher retention data on the school report cards and teacher racial and ethnic demographic data.
That's again, applause. That's really great. So
What you wanted, Ray. It's all for you.
I
It's all for you, Ray.
applaud you multiple times. Now for now for more skeptics. I am concerned that as you said, the teacher evaluation data is not apples to apples across LEAs. So I am concerned, and I want to raise it, that having these what look to be apples to apples comparisons across the LEAs about teacher effectiveness and whether or not they're staying and helping all demographic groups. I gotta say, we don't really know that based on this because the ratings are done so differently. So I would encourage you to revisit that. And then a question, which is, as I understand it, charter schools don't need to hire teachers who are certified. So I'm assuming that's part of why we don't have a certification indicator here.
Yeah, so your understanding is correct. OSSE requires certification of DCPS teachers. OSSE does not require that of charters, although we know that there are certain charters who do require it of their teachers. We do publish on our LEA profiles the percentage of teachers who are certified for our LEA school report card, the percentage of teachers who are certified for DCPS. We don't have that same publication for charter schools.
So I just want to say, we've asked, that is something that would be helpful. The other thing is you do have it for Infield. And is that across both sectors?
Yes, our infield data are across both sectors. And one way that an LEA can demonstrate that a teacher is infield is through a credential in the subject area in which they are teaching, but it's not the only way.
So they can do it through sort of a.
They can also do it by demonstrating that
You're
the
a math
individual
teacher
was
and you will have a
teaching
math.
exactly was
But
prepared to
that's-
teach that subject. Yeah.
That's it. Thanks again. And I think it's great.
So we have 3 more hands, so I'm going to go to those hands and we'll close the round of question. We're going to go to Dr. O'Leary, Representative Chang, and Representative Thompson.
The first is, how can a teacher be classified as experienced after 1 year of teaching? Who decided that?
Yeah, so this is a definition that OSSE developed and
Okay,
submitted.
how could anyone decide that someone with 0 to 1 year of experience is experienced. We all, a lot of us are teachers. And I was more of a teacher than anybody. And I know that I was not experienced after the first year or the second or the third year. The second question I have is, what is OSSI doing? Or can OSSI? Maybe that's the question. What is being done to make teachers who start teaching because they love to be a teacher become experienced teachers, which I would define as 5 years? What is OSSI doing, or what can OSSI do to give those people mentors? Can you do that or is that defined by the LEAs themselves?
Great question. We're providing a significant level of support to LEAs to support them in developing mentoring and induction programs. We're in year 3 of launching a year-long mentoring and induction professional learning community, which provides robust support. It's 30 hours of programming, and it ends it's a project-based learning, so it ends in a project that then the LEAs use to either deepen or continue the mentoring and induction programs that they have, because we agree we need to support our early career teachers. And the heart of what you're saying, Representative O'Leary, that there are significant gains that accrue to a teacher throughout their early years of experience is well backed by research, well backed by experience. To be clear, our experience definition, if you have fewer than 1 year's experience, you could not be an experienced teacher. That's a definition that was established through our ESEA plan for reporting purposes.
Was that your decision to define them that way?
This happened prior to my time at OSSI.
No, I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking about OSSI's. Was it OSSI's decision to define that as 0 to 1? Or is ESSA saying that it's supposed to be 0 to 1?
The ESEA requires that states calculate this term, but doesn't provide a definition for it. But then the U.S. Department of Education approves the state's definition.
Is there a chance that that definition could be changed?
Could be amended potentially. There is a process under which states can submit amendments for consideration.
Thank you. 2 more. I have 26% of teachers left the system in 21, 22. And that's the number you give us. All right. The question I have is, how do we know? Did every teacher that left the system report where they went?
Yeah, great question. So the way that we figure out whether someone is in the same role, same school is again through that LEA reporting. We assign each individual a unique identifier. And so if that individual remains in the faculty and staff data collection, but for example, moves from school to school, but still stays in that teacher classification, then they would be retained, but in a different category, right? They would be a mover. If they move into a different role, again, we're still able to identify them by that unique identifier, but they would be a changer. When they leave the system as a whole, that's when we lose them. So when they're no longer reported in the system, we know that they are no longer in the system, but we don't necessarily know where they went.
Okay, the last question I have is, why can't we get the numbers on today, whatever day today is, the 8th of September, from the schools right now that don't have teachers? Why
Yeah.
can't us? I mean, isn't that some part? I mean, getting these things a year later isn't any help at all. I know that there are plenty of schools in my ward that are lacking teachers right now, that are begging for teachers, that have interviewed teachers that they haven't been processed. Why can't we find out right now how many ex-school teachers however to say that, the teachers aren't there right now, because the principals know.
Yeah, I really appreciate the urgency of the question. That there is certainly some sunshine in the timeline between when we collect these data and when we're able to report them.
Oh, it's not just sunshine. It's huge sunrise. I'm asking the question
Yeah.
like today.
Yeah.
can you find out in a couple of weeks how many teachers are not being hired? Or why there are empty classrooms in our schools?
One of the challenges associated with data collection in this space is that to date, we've done a point in time data collection. And so we're asking LEAs to provide us with these data as of October 5th. And then there's a robust process that they go through in order to certify the data. And then
I understand all that. Now, I'm out of time,
Okay.
but that robustness needs to be guided in a different direction so that we can find out the numbers of teachers that are missing from our schools.
I really
Period.
appreciate that. And I
thank
can
you.
just share that we are very interested in thinking strategically as part of making our data collection more granular, more doing those student teacher data linkages to getting to a place where we can do it more rapidly. So thank you for the question. And I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dr. Leary and Ross, Representative Tang, and then Vice President Thompson, and then we'll move on.
Thank you so much. I'm honing in on the 126 English language arts vacancies.
Mhm.
And wanted to ask if you know why that particular position had so many more vacancies than the rest.
That's a great question, and we don't collect qualitative data as part of the faculty and staff data collection. We collect quantitative data. So, you know, as the state agency, we are collecting large reams of data, and then they invite sophisticated questions like the ones that you and this body are asking. We don't know the why behind it, but we are certainly interested in finding out, and we'll be looking this year at our data collection to see if that vacancy rate persists over time
Particularly, as you noted, since it contrasts up here.
with our national average, or with, yeah, exactly, with our peers and others.
So then the follow-up question is, who was teaching our kids how to read?
Yeah, I think it is, I think it is, considering these data alongside the data that my colleague Evan will be presenting later today, I think is really important. And these data combined, you know, the research continues to indicate, the lived experience of so many around this table continues to indicate that our teachers are the most important factor in impacting student achievement, student effectiveness, student learning, student lives. And so I don't have a good answer to this question, except that it is something, I assure you, it's something that's top of mind for us. And we're excited through some other work streams to really dig into.
Thank you. And I think what would be really helpful is thinking through, yes, why, right? And what steps were taken this last year to fill those, work around the vacancies and what we can learn from that next year.
One piece of data that we got from some schools that we did some follow-up monitoring from was that there were significant rates of, so again, these are point in time data. They do not mean that those vacancies persisted for the entire year. And schools reported to us that there were significantly higher rates of mid-year hiring last year that they attributed to the pandemic, although of course there could be multiple factors.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. Vice President Thompson?
First, my comment. I share Representative Williams' concern about the experience teacher. Definitely, I think I brought that up in a presentation. And for many of the reasons we talked about, but I want to actually, focus in on not the years in the definition, which I think we could raise, like somewhere between 3 and 5 will speak to my spirit. But I want to focus in on the part that was like, if you are an effective teacher, given that each LEA is to determine their own teacher evaluation policy. And so that means we're actually like experience at IDEA might be different than experience in UTS. And I would just like to see some consistency around our definition. I also tend to believe that experience is different than effective, whatever we like. It's not a value judgment on like what you did during that time. It is actually like, do you have a certain amount of years of experience? And so I don't know if you all have given any thought or there's a rationale for why you have included that piece of the definition as far as the teacher rating, for lack of a better term. Or if you've thought about like any concerns for that reason.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question, and I think it, implicit in what you're saying is that rather than actually measuring 3 different categories, we are measuring two categories, and one of which there's some partial overlap, right? There's some overlap between the experience definition and between the effectiveness definition. And so that is certainly something that's on our radar, and that we are well aware of the level of availability of that definition. In terms of why the initial decision was made to establish that as our definition, you know, I think it is helpful to recall the time at which OSSE was developing and implementing its state plan was about half a dozen years ago. It was a time during which the city, you know, was just coming out of implementing race in the cap and ESEA flexibility, all of which required all of these LEAs to be implementing or working towards implementing teacher evaluation systems that mirrored each other pretty closely, that included at least the same certain core metrics. And obviously, with the passage of ESEA, you know, that changed. And we do see more differentiation across the systems that our LEAs are using. We also see, you know, we live in a jurisdiction in which we see new LEAs opening, right? Who are not necessarily pegged to what we were doing in 2015, 2016. My guess is that the sort of uniformity of the eval systems, just based on the federal requirements that were in place for jurisdictions like BC that had ESEA flexibility, that have raised to the top dollars. That's why that definition was landed on. But I can't speak definitively because I wasn't part of those conversations.
I mean, I guess I would like, for what it means to be an experienced teacher in Ward 7, given we probably have my dozen different LGAs in my ward, to be the same. And I can't imagine how that could be true, just given the variances that are true today. So that would be my thoughts on this in particular. And then my other question is just where would data live that has a little bit more of a historical view over time? I mean, like just with like 3 years, how the changes been, 5 years, how the changes been, where would you go to find that?
That's a great question, and that's the data that we're working to build over time, because our OSSE began doing the faculty and staff data collection comprehensively from all DC LEAs in fall of 2020. And so to date, we only have 3 years of these data. This year we're adding on, we'll have 4. Next year we'll have 5. We do have data from the Staffing Data Collaborative that's compiled in a report that's about this level of granularity from 2018. But what part of the work that we have been doing over the past couple of years is really to build that longitudinal data system. And it is my firm belief that one of the best ways that we can help ensure that we continue to build this data system is simply by having conversations like the ones that we're having. Continue to build on and make it smarter and better. So I really appreciate the great questions. Thank you.
So I want to thank Ossie for the presentation. I thank my colleagues for the good questions. I also want to remind folks that as Ms. Ross just said, this new round of data collection that Ossie presented tonight, this 3-year historical look, is something that the state board has asked for over time. We have asked for more teacher data. We have asked for it. So we're grateful that it is here. All the things that we're pushing for are to continue to grow the body of this and to continue to make sure that we can refine this data to be at the kind of level that we know the public has questions about. So thank you for hearing us. If we have further questions, because I know some members had more questions than we got to tonight, we'll compile those and have our staff follow. All right. So then I'm going to turn to Mr. Ball.
Thank you so much. And I am not quite as proficient at speaking quickly as Ms. Ross is, so I will try to be pithy and maybe speak less. But in terms of what I have today is also, unlike Mr. Kramer and Ms. Ross, who is coming to give you information, I'm really coming here to listen to the board on the topic of community service graduation requirement. So if you look at the slide, our regulation says that students need to complete 100 hours of volunteer community service to graduate, and the specific volunteer community service projects shall be established by the LEA. Council has waived this requirement for graduating seniors for the past 3 years due to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, and without any action by the state board or council, that 100-hour requirement will be fully reinstated for the upcoming 22-23 school year. So just a couple things for you guys to keep in mind as you're providing feedback here today. Those students that have entered high school over the past couple of years during the pandemic, have not had this requirement in place, so they may not have been thinking about this, they may not have been working towards the 100-hour requirement. So that is something that I think is important to keep in mind as you all give feedback on what you think the next step is for this upcoming year. So I'm here to really listen to you and see, should we eliminate this requirement altogether? Should we reduce it? Should we retain it? That's one question. Another question is, if we reinstate it at 100 hours, we could raise it, 120, we could lower it, 50 hours, 80 hours, whatever, it is decided is best. Should there be a scaffolded timeline? So should it, instead of having 100 hours come in this year right away, maybe it would be 25 hours for seniors, maybe 50 for junior. So that scaffolded timeline is another consideration that I would love to hear feedback from the board on. And then lastly, a question is, should we provide any specific flexibilities for subgroups of students? So for example, transfer students or another group of students that you may identify. And there may be, and I'm going to show you some options here in a second. I will say this is, if you go to the next slide, these are just options that we're sort of brainstormed, but there may be something that's outside of this chart as well that you all come up with that you think is important to consider as we reflect on the community service requirement that may be seeking change, and we would love to hear that as well. So just to walk through the options that we were able to come up with. So one option would be make no change. So a benefit of that is that community service is it can be really impactful and really beneficial for the students and the community. It can help build mindsets. It can help create connections outside of school. There are a lot of benefits that come with that. So doing all 100 hours, you would get the maximum amount. A drawback is that imposing all 100 hours on seniors to complete in their last year may be a bit burdensome for them to complete, especially there may be some continuing concerns around the pandemic, and what has not been set up in infrastructure. Maybe counselors maybe didn't advise them of this requirement, and certain organizations that may be available were closed as well. So that is something to consider. Another option would be to permanently remove the community service requirement. This would make it easier to graduate, which would be the benefit. The drawback is that all those benefits you get from completing community service would disappear. Another option would be to lower the requirement. So 80 or 50 hours, if this would make it easier for students to graduate. They would still get benefits from doing community service. The benefit would be that so that would be the benefit. A drawback would be that, again, if you're lowering it, that means there's less time to form those connections, to build those skills that come with completing community service. And then the fourth option here is, again, the scaffold, the timeline. So you can we can decide to reinstate at 50 hours, 100 hours, 120, whatever we think is best. But to do it in a time frame that allows seniors to complete less, since they are only having 1 hour or 1 year to complete, then juniors a little bit more, sophomores a little bit more, and then whatever the full amount would be for freshmen. So those are really the options that I would love to hear feedback on, and just here to listen to you guys' thoughts.
All right, let's start with this timer again, and I'm going to start with our students who have thoughts. So let's go with Representative Bernstadt and then Representative Jones Burgess, and then we'll come to our adults.
We're looking forward to coming to this.
Where's the time?
Hi, I'm one of those seniors, which means for us, we started freshman year and we only had until March. I know at that point I had like 10 hours. So I definitely need more time to think about this, but my immediate thought is number 4 makes the most sense, because then we'll still do, because I definitely think it should be lowered, just because we haven't had much of an opportunity to do community service. Like, yes, we're back in person now, but a lot of the community service, the COVID regulations around those events have been really unclear. And it's also just not easy for students to participate in. So I think it makes sense to reinstate a requirement. I'm not sure 100 or 50 hours. I don't know which one, but and start with 25 for this year's seniors because they have had a little bit of in-person time. But let's be honest, like no one was making probably the best decisions their freshman year. They need more time to gather hours. So I think 25 makes sense because that's how much we are supposed to complete in a year. We're supposed to do 25 each year, or at least that's what we're told. So I like that report.
Representative Burgess.
Answering your first question, I think that flexibilities for transfer students definitely should be offered. Now, about the hours, see, I'm the freshman that's gonna get all my hours done within 2 months, so. You know, I've got like 50 hours or 75 now. So I feel like it gives like a load of responsibility to students, like, you know, get your community service hours, you know, giving them a little responsibility while they're also maintaining their grades. And I think that's not bad because, you know, as long as most schools be like, get 25 hours each year, you'll be on the right track. Listen to the rules, then you'll be on the right track. But some schools don't provide students with like the opportunities to get community service hours, which allows students to be like, where am I gonna go to get the community service hours? And the schools are like, I don't know. So students just don't get them. So like, how do we solve getting these opportunities out to students?
Any other thoughts from our students? All right, then let's go to our adult members for now. Come to Dr. Leary, Vice President Thompson, Representative Wattenberg, Dr. Gessel.
I don't think that, I think community service is very important. For the students, because what we talk to seniors about is what life is like after the graduation day. And we want to prepare our students to be ready for life after graduation. So 25 hours a year is not many hours. And the community service, if it's done correctly, is very beneficial and will put people into a different kind of a track in their lives. I think that the number 4 is the way to go, but I think it ought to be 25 hours for seniors this year, and then juniors have to have 50 hours, then 75, and then 100 for the freshmen. If they just do 25 hours is not hard. You can do that in 3 weekends, really. But it's very valuable. There's always, and it's not a hindrance to graduation. It doesn't mean it's at the end of the year, some students had to do 25 hours in 2 weeks. Yeah, that probably is. But you know, that's because procrastination is part of life as a teenager and an adult.
Thank you, Dr. O'Leary. Vice President Thompson.
I do agree that procrastination is part of my life as an adult. That's my truth, and I'm sticking to it. I think so I remember when I first joined the board, we had a couple of young people came to us and raised the issue of if I'm someone who just works, right? I'm probably gaining valuable experience. Like I could be doing work that is of service to my community. I'm tutoring, but I'm getting paid for it, right? Like all the things that will probably be benefits of community service, but I can't count that toward my hours, and I need to work. I would like us to think about like how we can address that situation. I told Inc, so that's like my first thing. Second, I totally believe that we should take some type of scaffolding approach to the community service hours requirement for this year, for all the reasons laid out already, as far as like typically try to aim for 25, like that type of thing. That makes sense to me. I would, whether I was a student who could get it done, like Representative Burgess in a month or not, I think it would have been my spirit if somebody told me I had to get 100 hours in a year where everybody else had 40. And it's a pandemic and all the things. In senior years, particularly, not all the super reps, but we've all been there. We know what senior year is. So that's the second thing, the scaffolding approach. Third, I learned recently that the state board actually had a recommendation prior to me joining the board about possibly reducing the hours to 50. I would be curious, where this fits into, like, I see that you all have this number 3 permanently and immediately lower. If we went that route, like, how do I put this? Will we do 50 and scaffold it? So then would the requirement be 1/4 for 50? Do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah. So I tried to say option 3 is one option to just say 50 immediately for this year, but in option 4, the scaffolding could be. We could do the
Combo
scaffold
option.
for 50, or we could do the scaffold for 100. Those are both
Oh,
options, so.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood kind of how that, and again, I wasn't on the board then, so I wasn't fully engaged in the conversation around how we got to 50. But I would also just be curious to hear more about that.
The math won't be, if we did 50, of course, the math won't be nice and neat,
Yeah.
but
But not just the math,
Concepts
just
are
like
usually-
why you're considering it now. And if like, if it was in response to the board's recommendation, or if there's something else, like if it's the same thinking or it's different.
it was, it came out of the most recent leadership meeting. I think we will about it, the board recommendations, on, the historic recommendations on graduation requirements, which included recommendations on community service, to lower it to 50 hours. What I said before, though, is yes, the board voted to approve that report, but there was still a lot of discussion and disagreement between board members. It ultimately was the voice of the board, and that was many years ago, and many boards ago, and many leaders ago.
Yeah.
So I just thought putting it on the table with the rest of the options would get the 60 like.
Yeah.
And for other members who aren't here, as well as for student representatives, several years ago, the board created a task force, the High School Graduation Requirements Task Force, and the board adopted a report of recommendations from that task force on how to adjust high school graduation requirements. One of the recommendations in that report was to permanently lower the community service hours from 100 down to 50 for the 4-year time period. So that's why, that's what Mr. Flow is referring to. I think I said Representative Wattenberg and then Dr. Gifford.
Okay, so first, I was on the board during the time of that task force, and the way you described it, President Sutter, is exactly right. I do want to say, I believe, and Mr. Cooley might remember better than me, I think that was the least controversial of the recommendations, if I'm remembering correctly, that there was a general view, which we heard a lot from feedback, was that the 100 hours was too much, and that it was too much in a very disproportionate way in terms of race income, people who had to have full jobs, take care of kids, and so on. I'm also hearing our student reps who are think we gain a lot from it. We've also heard that from some teachers. I have a certain slant towards that way. So a couple of things. One, this is something that if the timeline allowed, I would really like to have enough time to sort of be able to put some recommendations out and really hear from students and from families and get some broader sense of how it affects people and how people see the trade-off of it's useful, but it has a lot of downsides. And so I wonder if we could get recommendations in October as proposed here, but not vote until November, or does that sort of run up against an official timeline?
You want me to?
Yeah, please do.
Sure. So one is we are amenable to that. I think President Sarah asked before the meeting, since we had so much content, could we punt? And I was like, no, we probably shouldn't punt. So we should start teeing this up because we do need to get guidance to seniors. If you're going to make seniors do anything this year, we need to tell them rather quickly, even if it's a small number of hours, we need to be able to tell them quickly. So the longer we go through that process, the more urgent that problem becomes. But I think that we would be amenable if, I think we could even be amenable that if we were to do some sort of relaxed thing for seniors this year while we figure this out, like that is on the table if we want, just depending on how much engagement we want to do. I don't want us to delay forever. I don't think that this should linger too long. I think we should figure out a way to get to right size and get it back on track so we can move out. This is a policy that we created during the pandemic in response to the pandemic, and we don't need to have a modified policy.
Yeah, when it comes to Dr. Gasoy, and then looks like a couple hands coming back up again.
Most of my questions were answered, but I will add, has Oxy got input from students?
Other than our students here
Yes, that I-
tonight,
yeah.
not,
Okay, and then, but do you have a sense of the primary challenges? I know that, students having to work and pandemic have been main challenges. Are there others that, you know, that we should be considering going forward?
I think over the course of the year, we've heard net negative from students. I think on this, I think we've heard the too much, 100 hours is a lot, especially when you're not getting paid. I think that we've heard, like, I think there's some inconsistent, like, what constitutes community service, like a definitional question that we could provide some clarity to in the regulation that seems to be a little problematic. Like, I think maybe sometimes people are too, maybe a little bit hard-nosed about what constitutes community service. And we're like, don't overthink it. Like, you know, I think we can figure out some sort of definition to provide some guidance there to make this more, make this more clear. You know, overall, we would be amenable to figuring out other ways to engage students on this too. I think we just need to figure out some core parameters. I think we shouldn't just go out, community service, go. I think we need to be like, hey, what about something like this and provide feedback? Let's give people a tighter sandbox to play in.
So I have a couple, do you have more questions?
Well, I guess I would just say that, for what it's worth, I agree with, Representative Bernstadt, that number 4 in the immediate makes sense, but I also like this idea, of then thinking of what we can do going forward. You know, like for this year, we need an immediate fix, as noted. But it is an issue that was a pre-pandemic issue. And so I think there's a little more, I mean, it's something I feel like we could get much more insight into if we gathered more input from students and teachers. And then also I think we could get more creative with solutions. So that would be my hope that
we could also potentially do a scaffolded like 25 hours this year. And then if there needed to be more robust engagement later on to adjust it, that could be something that's for later.
I want to throw a couple thoughts out, then I see 2 more hands coming, and then I'd like to wrap this up. And any further thoughts we'll collect and discuss with Asi at our next leadership meeting, which is on Monday. So a couple thoughts. One is I'm inclined towards where my colleagues are going as well, that we go with sort of the simple, elegant solution for this year, and we scaffold it so that seniors have predictability and know where things are going. So that's where I'm leaning as well. But I think the more robust discussion here is really important, because I'm listening to Representative Bernstadt say, you know, I don't have that many hours. Like, you're on the board for a second time. Of course you have that many hours. This is service. But recognizing that I'm not sure how many students are aware of the many ways in which they interact with their communities that may be counted as service, or they could or should be counted as service that may not currently be counted as service. So any student on our SAC should be counting that as service hours, and that should be getting signed up on, and that should be counting. Students in the chancellor's cabinet, students on their schools, you know, boards or other ambassador, student government opportunities, all of that should be treated as service. I'm not sure everybody knows that. I'm not sure there's a common definition. So I think there is a lot of engagement work doing. I also think thinking about why we have a service requirement and really making sure there's constant messaging on that from the SEA to the LEAs, and then from the LEAs to their students around, theoretically, there's a purpose that says it's important for us as citizens to be engaged in our communities in ways that are not for pay. And this shouldn't take away from our ability to earn money, but also should be opportunities to engage simply because there's a passion or a connection or a desire to give to community. But that I think is also incumbent on the adults to help connect students to service opportunities that exposes them to those opportunities to connect. Last thing I'll say is that if our students are willing, and I am asking this of them, they do not have to answer now, it might make sense to invite Asi to ask the SAC this question at an upcoming SAC and to have that opportunity. So I saw Representative Bernstadt's hand, Representative Wattenberg's hand, and then if any other folks have further commentary, Vice President Thompson, anyone else wants to chime in, we'll take those comments and then wrap up.
Okay, well, if this is to come to a vote, so it depends on how we move forward with this, obviously has to come present to the SAC. So we will definitely be hearing from SAC representatives. I can ask students in my school and send you their feedback. The second thing, which I think Justin was talking about, last year, when the requirement was waived by the DC Council, it was like April. And everybody in my school, all the administrators, all the students were coming to me and asking me what was happening. I had no idea. And it created a lot of, it was really hectic. So I definitely think the faster the better with whatever we decide. And if we need to do something just for this year and then move forward, that makes sense. And then I'm thinking back about number 4. And now that I've had a little more time to think about it, I think it makes sense to reinstate a requirement with 50 hours on a graduated timeline. This timeline being 25 this year for class of 2023, and then moving on to 50 hours for every other class. Because like a lot of members have mentioned, there are a lot of things that students do every day that count as service towards community that don't count as community service. If you have siblings and you're watching your siblings every day after school on the weekends, you might not have time to go to Rock Creek Park and do the trash cleanup, but you are still helping your community, you're helping your family, or students who work every day. I'm lucky because being a student representative, I get service hours. I also work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if I was not here, I probably would not be able to get hours because I just don't have the capacity to do things out of that time. And then like the other thing I mentioned earlier, this one every day is like, COVID has been really hard. Like there are some virtual options, but they get me maybe an hour or 2. And they're not consistent. I noticed that with a lot of people, finding consistent community service is what's really been important. And it's been hard to find a COVID safe way to do that, at least from what I've seen.
Thanks for coming, Brenda. Also just note, as I come to Representative Wattenberg, that Serena Hayes, our ombudsperson, is watching and noted that in some other places, students are able to start earning community service in middle school. So you might also think about the opportunities for students to begin getting credit for that and whether there are systems that would help those hours follow them from middle school through high school on some sort of transcript, whether that's possible. Representative Wattenberg.
2 very quick things. One thing that I think should be considered is whether it might be an elective, which would sort of cut the baby a little bit here, but for many people, it is a great option. And for many people, it's not, and that might be a way to do it. It would also put schools in a position to really think more thoughtfully and intentionally about what would be good about this. And then at some point, maybe it would expand. The second thing is, and this is really a question for the board, for the officers, for the staff, is in advance of even this coming September meeting, possibly, but otherwise for October, wonder if we could have just sort of a quick survey that people could get out to their constituents, get out to students, that you guys can get out to your group, that we could just send out to school principals and try to get some feedback. So that's just an idea.
Vice President Thompson.
I think 3 things. So one, I had the same thought as someone else about the split it. So like, do what we need to do for this year as far as scaffolding, and then we can do the engagement around what we need to do long term. Because I think that's what we talked about. We can be more, not just more creative with the solution, which is what I think we said, but we can also be better understand what problems we're solving for. So I think that's really important. I am, like Representative Burns said, I am acutely aware of the fact that the council like this came in and did it and nobody knew, and I don't want us to kick the can down the road that happened again. And they just wiped out everything they said nobody has to do. So I think this scaffolding will be the right thing, and it is our job to do it. And soon it will be better to let people know. I'm excited to think about revisiting like why we think community service is good. I love the idea around could we think about starting earlier, because my guess is students are doing a lot of things that are contributing to their things earlier, and that might help just make that a longer runway for people. And to the point about the definition, that's something I run up against a lot. People coming to me asking, like, could it count? And people are very hard nosed sometimes, and they're like, oh, well, my kid's been working with, and and I'll say in a community like mine, not everybody has capacity to deal with the IRS and get a 501c3. And that's just a tax burden, but you'll have schools say in their documents, it has to be signed off by a nonprofit. That is a meaningless, that doesn't mean anything to the student or their impact or their contribution. So I think that common definition is going to be an important one as we identify like the engagement. All right.
I did have the one other slide that asked the question around especially breaking out subgroups, in particular the transfer students. I've heard from military families in particular that there's some concern of having to transfer in at the last semester and not being able to necessarily catch up. I heard some positive remarks from Representative Jones Burgess, but but if there was anybody who felt otherwise, maybe they could speak up. Otherwise, everybody's aligned there. Oh, yeah.
Is this a tracking issue? Like, is this what count, or are they coming from, is it not common in jurisdictions to have a community service requirement?
Yeah, the latter coming from a jurisdiction where there is no community service requirement.
And this is also an issue too. We are part of where states are part of this like states that does the transfer agreements between states. Like this is a place where this is where that feedback has come from. Yes.
I wonder if there's an opportunity, and however we determine that this 1 year scaffolded requirement could be one that applies to transfer students.
Cool. And which if I think we can figure this out. I'm pretty confident.
So I'll then ask my colleagues, if folks have additional thoughts coming at it tonight after you've had the chance to ruminate on it a little bit, please share those thoughts with Vice President Thompson and myself. We will talk about this at our leadership meeting on Monday and return to the board and figure out if we can arrive at something for this year's graduating seniors, the class of 2023. Class of 2023 as soon as possible, as well as if we can figure out a process to have a more robust engagement on the discussion service more broadly. Thank you all. And thank you, Mr. Call. We know that you have things to get to this evening, so we'll not be offended if we need to head out. We are going to turn now to Mr. Kramer. Thank you for your patience and bearing with us.
Thanks for having me. I think I'm still reeling a little bit from that 2023 number. Personally, just feeling old. Yeah, I'm not feeling old, but thank you so much for having me. I am looking forward to speaking with you all about our 2021-22 statewide assessment result. And I will be brief to give us time for. So let's jump into the next slide. So before we talk about the results, it's important to think about some context and framing around administering assessments in the 2021-22 school year. So students were assessed this year for the first time since the 2018-19 school year. For roughly half of our students, this was the first time that they had taken a statewide standardized assessment. And this is important to know in looking at how the results compared to prior years. During this period, we know that students experienced interrupted learning. Most BC students participated in distance learning for most of 2019-20, and for virtually all of 2020-21. And while students were learning in person for 21-22, they did return to the classroom facing significant challenges. So in response to the pandemic, we spent nearly $1 billion of federal stimulus funds and directed them to support recovery efforts. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Let's actually go on to the next slide. I'm challenging myself to be crisp. So I want to start with some key takeaways for you all. So a couple of quick notes. So despite attendance challenges, which were meaningful and varied across age groups, more than 94% of students completed their statewide assessments. The data do reinforce the investments that we've made in the recovery and restoration work, and these data will help drive our decision-making going forward. This does help us have a clearer picture of where our students are and what we need to do to support them. And we see these data in national and local context, right? As national and local trends suggested before we administered assessments, the results show that students who are already the furthest from opportunity before the pandemic experienced the largest setbacks in this administration. So let's talk a little bit about the participation rates that we see on the next slide. It's important to note that high school participation rates were slightly lower than those for students in grades 3 through 8. The participation rate decrease was more pronounced between 2019 and this most recent year in high school. 41 schools had all or almost all of their students participate in ELA, and that number was 50 schools in math. That is significant, and we know schools made significant efforts to get all their students to that. On the next slide, you'll see the numbers themselves split out by our different assessments, different subjects, and different grade bands. These are the number of expected participants, folks who are eligible to participate, folks who actually did participate, and the participation rate therein. I'll spend just a little bit of time here for folks who are not familiar. The MSAA is a multi-state alternate assessment. It is an alternate assessment for students with significant cognitive disabilities. About 1% of students in the district. The next slide shows our participation rates across grades and in ELA and math. And again, the major takeaway here is that participation rates were lower in high school, which is something we have to continue to invest in and support both students and schools and the importance of assessing in high school. So let's talk performance now that we've sort of contextualized who participated. I want to start with some key takeaways. So the first thing to note is that we did see decreases in ELA proficiency, but most especially in earlier grades, that is 3 through 5 and 6 through 8. Math proficiency from 2018-19 to 21-22 dropped substantially across all grades. In math, 60% of students scored at the 2 lowest levels of performance on the PARCC assessment. 48% scored at the lowest 2 levels in ELA, which suggests that we have a significant proportion of students who are performing behind grade level. We also know that assessment scores vary significantly by race and ethnicity. So Black, African American, or Hispanic Latino students saw the largest decrease in proficiency on ELA assessments, while math proficiency decreased by more than 10 percentage points or more for most race and ethnicity groups. And the proficiency rate of at-risk students decreased more than the proficiency rate of not at-risk students in both math and ELA. So these are sobering results, and I just wanted to. So that's a summary of performance, but on the next slide, we'll look at performance by individual performance levels. So this reflects only our traditional assessment part. And you see there are 5 performance levels, with level 4 and level 5 being considered proficient on these exams. So you can see the distribution across different grades here, and a total of 31% of students who took the ELA assessment were at or above grade level, and that's across all elementary, middle, and high school grades. This proportion was lower in math, 19% compared to 31% were at or above grade level on a math assessment. You're doing a great job. We're going to do a little look at comparisons, and then we'll talk some about cohort analysis. But what you see here is that fewer students were proficient in ELA in 2022 compared to 2019. And these rates of decline were particularly pronounced in lower grades. So just to orient you to what you're seeing here, the blue bars represent the 2018-19 assessment year, 21-22 is in orange. These are broken out by grades. I realize it's a little hard to see on the screen. The first set of bars is grades 3 through 8, the second set of bars is grades 9 through 12, and the third set is all grades. So I wanted just to come back for a moment to Dr. O'Leary's question about who was teaching our kids, or excuse me, I think I was actually Representative Chang's question about who was teaching our students reading. Sorry, it was in that general direction. And I wanted to note that there are a couple of potential conclusions from this slide. One is that every teacher was taking seriously the business of teaching reading. And also that students who already knew how to read, that is folks who are later in their academic career, suffered fewer declines in their reading performance between 2018-19 and 21-22, which makes some intuitive sense. If you already know how to read, you can do more self-directed reading outside of the confines of a virtual classroom. On the next slide,
Is that related to a slide?
I believe so. It was the one we just had up, which I think 47, 46, 47. So we're on 48 now, and we'll look at math performance across years. And as we mentioned, while the performance in ELA was largely decreasing in the earlier grades, and in high school grades stayed fairly constant, we see that in math, performance dropped significantly across all grades. Let's get into the next slides where we look at performance by race and ethnicity and different student groups. So the highlights, not highlights necessarily, but the key areas to focus on here rather are that Black or African American students and Hispanic or Latino students saw the largest decrease in proficiency on ELA assessment. So what you're looking at is that the blue dot in this dumbbell chart is performance in 2018-19. The red dot is performance in 21-22. And so you see that there's distance between those two bars is greatest for students of color. The next slide details performance in math proficiency, and actually there's more uniformity here, which is to say that math performance decreased across the board by significant, or I would say meaningful amounts between 2018-19 and 21-22. I imagine I'll get the question about did gaps widen, or that may be something that's top of mind for folks, and so I did just want to voice over that for a moment. So at the state level, the gap between Black and African American students and white or Caucasian students increased from 58% percentage points rather to 61 percentage points. That reflects a downward shift for both, but a larger downward shift for Black or African American students. The gap between Hispanic and Latino students and white or Caucasian students increased from 48 percentage points to 53 percentage points. Again, these are sobering findings, and we feel it's important to be portrayed with you all. Okay, so ELA proficiency looks fairly similar. Sorry, I should be more precise here. We're looking at ELA proficiency not for race and ethnicity groups now, but rather different student groups of interest. So here we have English learners, we have students with disabilities, students who are at risk or not. And so a couple of notes here. ELA proficiency decreased by 6 percentage points from 2018-19 to 21-22 for students who are at risk. The overall decrease in all students' performance is, of course, dominated by the increase of at-risk test takers who have lower proficiency rates on a greater proficiency decrease. So that's largely the explanatory factor there. On the next slide, we see that in math performance, there are again substantial declines across different student groups. So the math proficiency rate decreased by 10 percentage points for students who are at. Again, these are sizable. So this is looking simply at students who tested in 2018-19 and students who tested in 21-22, and we recognize that those populations are not the same. So it is meaningful to talk about students more in a longitudinal way, and so that's what we do in the next couple of slides. So it is important, again, I just voice over, that a meaningful proportion of students tested in 2018-19 but did not test in 2021-22, and the opposite is true as well. So let's get into the next slide, which I think is probably better read than the next one. Which is probably better sort of digested than read, but I would just highlight a couple of key findings here for you all. The way we sort of looked at this is what were the 3-year changes between 2015-16 and 2018-19, and what were the 3-year changes between 2018-19 and 21-22. And it is reasonable to expect, based on what students experience, that the arc of those changes would not be the same. And that is true. So in proficiency rates, we found that in ELA, slightly more than 2,000 students who were proficient in 2019 were no longer proficient in 2022. In math, that number was more than 3,700 students, 3,760. And we also did see that there are significant changes in the distribution of scores, but it's a meaningful distribution changes in scores between those two sets of kids. This is an important piece of context to understand how students are experiencing testing in those different years and how their performance has changed in time. I'm happy to voice over on the next few slides some of the investments that we've been making in terms of our recovery, and if there's anything Mr. Duke wants to weigh in on, I'm sure he'll do the same. But I'll be quick and crisp here just to say that we were prepared for this moment as a district. We knew that students had not been assessed. in more than 2 years. We knew the pandemic had a profound impact on students. We knew that that impact was not equitably distributed across students. And in order to address the outcomes that we anticipated, we made significant investments in anticipation of what was to happen. So as I mentioned, we invested nearly $1 billion of federal stimulus money to support recovery and restoration of our public education and childcare sectors. And these are multi-year investments. We do not expect, I should say, these are multi-year investments. So we have identified 7 key areas of focus. We're targeting our state-led investments in those areas. These are accelerating learning, supporting safe reopening, promoting student and staff well-being, reimagining pathways to post-secondary success, stabilizing and strengthening early childhood education, improving outcomes for students with disabilities, and investing in our core infrastructure and operations. LEA spending of these funds is focused on accelerating learning, supporting safe reopening, and promoting student and staff well-being, which is logical, it makes sense. We have expanded access for more than 4,000 students to receive high-impact tutoring. We've launched new literacy trainings. Again, we did anticipate this moment, one we hoped, of course, that we could avoid, and also the investments we have made are validated by the results that we followed.
So one thing too is I would like to encourage everyone. We released, I think 2 weeks ago, a pretty strong dashboard tool that tracks state and LEA recovery dollars. So every LEA now has a dashboard that tracks all of their investments across all 3 pots of recovery money. Because the thing is that, remember, there were 3 recovery bills with different timelines to spend the money. So we have graphics that show you, and the first pot of money will end for ESSER 1 in September 30th. So you will see tracking against all of those pots of money for every LEA. We will also, and there's also some good sort of infographics that I think you might be able to use with your constituents that sort of level set, where is this money and how was it given and how do I know and where. So I encourage you to go and take a look at that and share it with your constituencies. The other thing too is that we try to be very nimble with this recovery money. So Evan mentioned $1 billion. 90% of that went out the door to LEAs, which we make sure that we get over to them, that we monitor, we track their spending, we make sure that they're using allowable uses, we're held accountable to the Department of Education. And then there were set asides with certain conditions for the state education agency. That's the programming that we're talking about here, is what was reserved to OSSE as the state education agency. You'll also see all of our efforts with that. These projects are not set in stone. Like, it is very nimble. What I personally think has been exciting here is that we have tried a lot of interesting things. We have seen participation in some of our programs. We have not seen as much participation in some of our programs. We have a senior advisor for recovery whose full-time job is to be our recovery czar. And she watches the money very intently. And when we see underspending, we are trying to not leave any money that was given to the district on the table and lapse it. And we're also making sure that we are being responsive to the data. One way we're working on doing that is to increase some of our professional development offerings, not only with literacy, but also with mathematics. So this is a place where we're starting to shift some money away from things where we were underspending to new investments. And we'll be talking more about some of those opportunities for educators as well.
That's a super helpful addition, and I think actually summarizes the sort of end of the presentation. So I would, I think, pause here and see what questions folks have. I imagine I may be.
All right, we've got questions. Once again, I'm going to defer to our students. So I'm going to start this time with Representative Jones Burgess, and then we'll come to Representative Bernstein and see where we are.
The ask about our Black and African American and Hispanic Latino students' proficiency rates decreasing because of the lack of Infield teachers. Do you believe that that's the reason?
It's a good question, and I would be hesitant to draw a causal line between those two things, right? I don't think it's quite as cause and effect as that. And also, I think that part of what we know is that there's a confluence of factors that contribute to what opportunities are available to students of different races, ethnicities, backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses. As my guess is, there's not a single thing like Infield teachers that are leading to that causal chain. Rather, it may be a contributing factor with a constellation of other factors that is leading to those differences. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the community, the state education agency, to ensure that students and educators have the supports they need to perform and high expectations regardless of where those students are coming to us from and what background they have. So the short answer to your question is I think it's probably not a one-to-one causal link. I think it may be a contributing factor, but difficult to say. Good question.
Okay, one more question.
Sure.
So for, like, I see here you had the high impact tutoring investment, but this is for like the next school year. How are you like surely tracking that these schools are actually putting in like realistic efforts to support students? Like, are they showing you proof that this is what they're spending their money on and they're using it to support the students?
Yes.
Yeah, please. Answer. So, what happens is to use the money, you have to agree that you are going to comply with the laws of where it says you can spend the money. And you have to write us out a plan and you have to obligate the money. You have to say, all right, we're going to spend it out in this way, and it has to meet those allowable uses. So schools, like your school, is spending their money one way for your community, and your school might be doing it the same way. There's no right or wrong way, but it does have to comply with the requirements of the law. You couldn't go out and spend it on pizza parties. You've got to spend it on actual direct investments for students that comply with the allowable uses of it. So that's why you saw a lot of like your masks, your maybe some tests, some of the like things that schools put up with keeping social distance. So you saw those things in your school. All the devices that have been increasing devices to support virtual learning. A lot of that money was used as part of the recovery money that your schools got. And then your school, like a lot of schools are going to invest in better curriculum. So better tools for their teachers to use. So every school does something different, but it does have to align with some requirements, but that schools do have a lot of flexibility so they can meet student needs the best.
Okay. One more thing.
Yeah, good question.
From personal like experience, I would like be like, okay, say no student has a pencil. The teacher would be like, okay, go to the office, and the office doesn't have any pencils somehow. Or like for math, so say they are buying these things and just aren't giving it to the student. What do you do in that circumstance? I'm just saying.
I don't have a great answer to that. I think my personal answer is like doing a pencil. I never really liked the thing of like sending the kid to the office with a pencil, but I'm not the principal of the school. I don't manage their expectations. We have provided a lot of resources for schools to provide to meet students' needs. And so I think, you know, if that happened, I think you would be in a good position as a student representative to say, hey, come on, can't we give the kid a pencil in your school? I do not have the power to come down and say, give the kid a pencil, but if there are students' needs, schools have a lot of to be addressing those needs. And this is why we're putting a lot of tools out there in the community to make sure that the public knows how much money is out there. That's a great question for you to ask.
Representative Brinstad.
Thank you. I'm looking at slides 45 and 46. I cannot help but look at these in a glass half empty kind of way. 31% of students took the ELA Park assessment were on or above grade level. If I'm understanding that correctly, that means 69% were below grade level, which I know means different things, especially when we're tracking like rates of growth as opposed to just where you are now, because that's extremely important. Yep. And I think this is kind of to Representative Joan Burgess's point. Is there a way, and this would probably take a while, but to see this data compared one to other states, how did states fall between now and COVID? They're between before COVID and now, whatever time this is, I don't know. Is there a way to line this data up? And obviously it's not a perfect comparison and the correlation is not going to be exact because there's a multitude of other factors, but like data that Representative Chang talked about earlier about ELA teachers and vacancies and how that compares to, you know, like assessment skills. And then I look at page 46 and it's 19% of students who took the math park assessment were on or above grade level, and I barely passed AP statistics, but that sounds like 81% was below grade level, so I would just appreciate, and I don't know if this is, I'm sure this is something that would take a long time, but just seeing those side by side and how they relate in DC.
Yeah, your question about comparing what the educator workforce looks like to the performance of students in schools is really important. And of course, it's important to note both the things that teachers do to support. We don't want teachers to be scapegoated, right, for those things. And also, it's a question about supports. So yes, having those side by side is something that we will do moving forward. And it's something that with the available data, you can do right now too. But something that we can certainly file. To your question about other states, that is unfortunately not as easy a question to answer as we'd like to, but I'll offer maybe a couple of thoughts. The first is that the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the Nation's Report Card, comes out in late October, at least as far as we're told. And that should give us a sense for how did students across the nation perform and how did the district fare on a comparable student. So that is going to be one of our best tools for understanding the district's performance relative to other jurisdictions. And I guess the other sort of couple of things I would say is, number one, it's hard to compare across states because states use different tests, and so comparing different measures is again a tricky business. But what we also saw is that, you know, district students spent more time learning from home than many other states. And so while a lot of states returned to a significant proportion of in-person learning in 2021, and therefore assessed, they were telling this same story last year. I would offer that, you know, while we don't know, one thing that is certainly distinct about our situation is that we did not test last year. We did feel that that was the best choice in terms of protecting the sanctity of our test and also protecting student health, of course. But we're having a very different conversation this year than I think a lot of states are, and that's, I think, worth noting.
Okay, great. And then I have one more. This is not a question. Slide 59.
Sure.
I like these like solutions. Address student mental health needs. Yeah, we should do that. I know it's like a little bit unspecific, and I know that we're definitely addressing this again as a board with OSSE because this is an ongoing question. So if I understood correctly, Mr. Tooley, it's that so the funds are just for the what was it called? High impact tutoring investment, right?
No.
Or those are distinct funds, and then there's also funds for different things.
There's a lot of different programs and efforts. What we have done, at least in the bucket for school mental health, is that through the Department of Behavioral Health, we have also taken money that OSSE gets and have built on the work of other things, like ways. Like we use some of our state money to say, hey, Octo, you are the district's technology people. You are providing services, help us with connectivity issues during the pandemic. Same thing with mental health. We don't have access to, we are not the clinicians.
Yeah.
That's the Department of Behavioral Health. So we partner with them. We have school support programs through the Department of Behavioral Health, and we are helping to enhance those programs and offerings for students through our investments. So it's leveraging other resources the city has put in and other agencies to add additional services. That's generally what we're doing in the area of mental health. But then there's other places where we would like to grow. I was very proud that we were making an investment in LGBTQ students and making sure that we are creating community practices and bringing schools together to make sure that there are more inclusive communities for all of our students, no matter their background, which was a first of its kind investment. Another place where we are looking to grow and improve is in, I know in interest of the board is in the use of school climate surveys and tools, and that will also help us increase our capacity of student experience and help us deploy additional services. So there's immediate sort of recovery efforts, and then there's also long-term things that we think that will serve us very well going forward. So think of the money as, yes, there are some things that we need right now at the moment, but there are also some things that we're building that we hope will stay around with us for years.
And I appreciate that this is under the category of like response to assessment results, because I think sometimes people think of mental health and your performance in school as divorced, and we know that's not true.
Really quick, going to behavioral health and mental health. Like, if that's not working for students, what's the next step? Because it seems like that's not working for a lot of students right now.
Yeah, so I think one is, I think this is a hard topic because schools can provide some services and make referrals to others. The mental health system is in the health, like I am not the health agency. I have to cooperate with the health agencies and the mental health agencies. And then we're also a part of the medical system, just like everybody else. I think this is a place of like trying to figure out what services schools can provide. If it's a very intensive need that a student has, they should be getting referred to like a clinician inside the building. Like a guidance counselor is not going to handle some of those issues. But what we're trying to build there is it's a gateway. It's a gateway. It's like if you have a problem, that a school knows where to go to get the kids the services that they need and can make that appropriate referral. This is a place where to be honest, our systems don't talk as well as they should. And it's a place where there needs to be a lot of improvement, both in DC and around the country and in the nation about making sure those services. Wish I had a better answer, but it's a work in progress.
All right, let's move to our adults. I know I saw a bunch of hands. Let's go to Representative
We
Chang.
sure we gotta do that.
Start with Representative Chang.
So I actually scrap my questions and go back to Representative Jones' purposes, because I think that this distinction between design and execution is actually really worth digging into. So last time you all were here, I asked what we will do, what we have designed to do to address some of these challenges coming up. And I think what you're getting me to really think about is how do we follow up on not just the inputs from the previous investments, but actually tracking the outputs and outcomes of those past investments, and whose responsibility is that? I feel like that's out of your wheelhouse, right? So that if it's not OSSI, who is it? OSSI's role and responsibility to do that, and if not, who is it?
It is a shared responsibility between us and the LEAs. I mean, you're talking about what's the connection, what's the through line between inputs and outputs. So if OSSI is saying the approved uses look like high quality instructional materials, or if state set aside looks like investing in programming for teachers that is about the science of reading, then it is incumbent upon us to make sure that the right folks get that training, that the training is high quality, that the training has an impact. And so one of the questions that we're investing in, and there are new folks who are joining my team, is to what degree have folks who participated in those trainings, are they adopting, putting those things in place? But again, there's sort of a long and wavy line between those inputs and what the output is. So while I'm, of course, as a data person, I'm always suspicious of public relationships, there is a responsibility we have to say, what was the investment we made? Was there fidelity of implementation? And therefore, did we see the concomitant changes that we would expect based on those inputs? So I hope that's a satisfactory answer to sort of who's responsible and how are we thinking about our responsibility in it.
And then we have like with high impact tutoring in particular, that's the program off the top of my head. There are requirements on the money that they have to be evidence-based and research, but you have to like do program evaluation on some of these things. And high impact tutoring, we have partnered with Edinburgh and Brown.
That is right.
To be our researcher of our effects. And also, we've been working with the DC policy. We're working on a paper on high impact tutoring. We actually get a lot of requests and people wanting information about our programs. That keeps us very busy. So so I think what Evan is saying is right. It's like there's a set of program evaluation that we will do on our programs, because at some point of the money, this recovery money will end. There will be a cliff. It's like we were going to have to decide what we're going to do, what not, what works, what didn't, and building that knowledge base, both what we do internally and what our stakeholders do, or even our research partners do, and even the RPP. I think we were having a very good conversation today about the RPP. If I were on the RPP advisory committee, which I am not, I would be encouraging people to think about how they are going to research some of these investments.
And this is an employee thought, but I'm thinking more about what she's saying around the pencil does not even exist when it's supposed to have been funded, right? And so I don't have it's an employee thought. There's no question there. It's just how do we?
Our schools are well resourced to pay for pencils.
Dr. Patterson had a question.
Yeah,
Dr. Patterson hasn't asked any questions tonight, so he can go first.
I appreciate that. Working at Educator, one of the biggest problems that we have, and can you tell me how it played it, how you used it or how you took them into account? And then
Yeah, so we obviously, it's a good question, and in many ways the right one. We have not, we're still getting attendance data, in, so we have not yet compared what a school's attendance will be to their assessment. But I would note that one of the things that we saw in terms of our participation rates is that our, the lower participation rates we saw in high school are related to some of the attendance challenges we saw, or at least there is a relationship. So to say how our attendance data reflected in these, we saw lower rates of attendance, slightly higher rate of chronic absenteeism in prior years. And one would suppose that attending less means that your assessment results the next year would go down. But trying to understand exactly what the impact of lower attendance is or higher chronic absenteeism is on the results we see is hard to do. For example, if you thought if our hypothesis was, well, attendance is sort of the biggest driver, then you'd have to sort of conclude that you would think that ELA and math in some ways wouldn't have as stark a difference as we're seeing, right? There is, it seems, something uniquely challenging about teaching math in a remote context. And that seems to be sort of irrespective of attendance issues. And so what we're seeing is certainly a reflection of attendance and also is a statement about interruptions of learning. Is that helpful?
that's kind of helpful. To follow up, are you looking at that by ethnicity as well? You're looking at a ward that would not be test or didn't get and they stayed out home, whatever the case is, kind of taking that into consideration.
We certainly will, and we'll certainly make the data available when we produce the report card in late November. And there's also sort of a grain size of that kind of information that's a little out of our field of view, but certainly all that the constellation of factors that you described is something that we would expect to bear out. Right. So what's my ability to get a test? What's my ability to return to school? What is therefore my ability to access instruction? And I think the best way for us as an agency to sort of approximate that is to look at what's the relationship between attendance and assessment for individual students, and then how does that what trends emerge based on race, ethnicity, other student group relations, etc. Not something we've done yet. Our first priority has been getting these results out to the public, but certainly something for us to follow up.
And then too, it's not just, we did a data request towards the end of the year at the council, and and we looked at the number of days that a student was out of school for work, like not asked, but just like the ins and outs.
Exactly.
And we saw like, so I think Representative Patterson, it's like students that were absent didn't show up at all is gonna be one. And I think that's Telethon was not for it. The other thing is going to be, there was just such discontinuity last year for students that even had good attendance and going in and out. Like I think with some of our products coming later.
You had a group that was quarantined for certain amounts of time.
Right. We had a very aggressive, like policy choices have consequences. Like I think we saved a lot of lives. I think we have a lot of people health. I don't think that we had a juvenile death in COVID that I was aware of. It wasn't very many. But there was a cost to some of the parameters. And I think that we are very interested in getting to better understand what some of those trade-offs are. And I think this data wasn't take the risk of those trade-offs, but I think at the end of the day, we made choices that saved a lot of people's lives. So,
Yeah, we're talking about learning loss, not loss of life, which is, those are not, that's a false equivalence.
It's a hard balance.
Yeah.
I want to get to more questions. I also want folks to be mindful. It's 7 o'clock. We still have a 30-minute presentation from the governance committee, as well as report outs, as well as new business. So just being mindful. Are there further questions for Ozzy at this time? We can also compile questions and send them to Ozzy. Representative Wattenberg.
Okay, I'll try to talk fast. So one,
You're the emeritus. You don't have to apologize. You're the pro 10. You're the pro 10.
the dean.
You're the dean.
But So a lot of this is really terrific, and I thank you all for putting it together. One question I have is, almost all of this, with I think one exception, is about changes in proficiency levels, which is telling us about the change of really a very subgroup of kids. Whether that particular group went up or down, you know, a few points or not, right? But what about at all the other levels? Do do you have the data that sort of shows at different levels from 19 to 21, what happened, whatever, 20 to 20, whatever the number is?
We do, I would, I'm trying to find a slide number for you where we, have both performance levels and folks who were proficient and, were no longer proficient.
But I mean, well, okay, so show me where, but I mean more, but, you know.
So I'm looking at 55 is the, probably the best proxy at a high level for the question that you're asked, right? Students who were proficient, who were not proficient and remain not proficient. You're asking about in the individual performance levels beneath that.
Yes,
Is that
and
right?
also broken down. In other words, when we look at this, we can see that at different schools, at different LEAs, among
Yeah.
different ethnic groups, at different grade levels. What people's performance, how it changed.
Yeah.
Right, or what it is. But what about being able to look at how it changed for, you know, African-American students, or how it changed at one school system, or how it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry, for.
Yep.
Saying it wrong. For kids that, who were twos, how many more twos went up or went down, how many threes went up?
Yeah, these are all good questions, largely. So if you looked at these as sort of escalators between levels, right? All the escalators that were trending down, that were taking you from a performance level previously to a lower performance level. Those escalators had more people traveling on them than the ones in the opposite direction. We also saw relatively few changes of 2 levels or more in either direction. And sadly, but sort of expectedly, based on the results that we see about students who are furthest from opportunity experiencing disproportionate decline, we saw that that was especially true, or we saw more declines in performance levels for students who were students of color, students who are economically disadvantaged, et cetera. So the results that we see in terms of changes between performance levels largely align with the year-over-year comparisons, even though we discourage that kind of year-over-year comparison. So yeah, they are, those results are consistent.
Let me say, I don't know if people got a chance to look at Betsy Wolf's graphs that he did. If you guys have also not seen them, they're very, very interesting. I sent them out to you. But if you look at them, so she tracked sort of part of this, the 2019 to the 2022 for just not all the different groups, but at least for some of the schools. And part of what's interesting and part of why I'm very interested in seeing the changes in different levels is there's a lot of anomalies that, I mean, if we know that overall the trends were down and overall they were worse as you are more at risk. But the number of things that aren't that are kind of interesting and they're not predictable. I mean, I'm just looking at, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 6 elementary schools, 6 BCPS elementary schools, and I think also 6 charter schools that actually went up. And they're not all the predictable schools. It's a real mixed school. So why? There's just, maybe there's really, maybe it's just weird, right? But maybe there's really something to learn there.
Yeah.
And I think it would be worth, and this is just at the proficiency level. So I think there could be stuff to look there. And
Sure.
Like Representative Wattenberg, I do need to move on. We're 40 minutes behind the agenda.
all right,
Dr. O'Leary needs to leave.
okay, so it's the growth at the different levels, more on the sectoral comparisons. But I also, this is a very quick, I just want to second what Representative Jonesburg were saying and Representative Chang about being able to understand what's happening, also going forward on these interventions, on the accelerated stuff in a very nuanced way would be great. And I would recommend, President Sutter, that we have a session just on that. Either here or actually at a public meeting.
So I'll point out that my question is that right now, and according to OSS's dashboard, a lot of LEAs have spent very little of their money. So I'm super excited to talk about interventions, but I'm not convinced that we have enough intervention data to talk about this year. And that might be something the board would need to discuss at the end of this coming academic year rather than at the beginning of this academic year. Like, if you look, if you haven't seen OSSI's dashboard for how individual LEAs are spending down their funds, many LEAs have spent a near fraction, like a 20th of what they have been given. And so I'm not sure we have data to discuss those interventions.
So that's super interesting, and I agree that to be for the future, but I think especially if that's the case, it would be great for us to hear a presentation on that even, so that when we
Okay.
talk to us. we know
I hear it.
about
I'm gonna move along so we can get to more questions. Dr. O'Leary.
Yeah, on slide 40, it talks about accepting participation.
Yes.
What does participation mean?
A student who completed the assessments and met the attentiveness rules, which have to do with providing an answer to a certain number of questions.
Since the park test began.
Mhm.
And as you know, I'm not a fan of the park test at all. I thought it was very unfair. But an inordinate amount of time was spent in the classrooms for that whole time that we would had the park test on test taking skills. It had nothing to do with preparing our students to be good readers or good thinkers in math. What now we don't have a park test this year, right?
We will, yeah, we'll have a statewide assessment for 20.
No, I'm talking about the park test. So not talking about an assessment,
Yeah, so we are in an active RFP and I can't comment on which test we'll have. in that.
but there won't be a park test. There won't be the PARC.
We're in an active,
What is being done? To the schools, if you don't know what the test is gonna be, then what is being done? Because we know that the reason our students didn't do well on the ELA part of the park test was because they don't read at grade level. We have this low figure of grade level readers. 31%, 69% of the students did not test on the park test at their grade level. What is being done to find out what the student's grade level is at the beginning of the year?
yeah, good questions. There are a couple of them in there. So in terms of where students' grade levels are at the beginning of the year, OSSI does not require a particular interim or diagnostic tool. That is something that we believe is flexibility that the LEA should have. And many LEAs are using different tools to understand where students are in terms of their grade level. It is pretty varied across the district, which we saw in some of the local assessments.
Is that your decision? OSSI's decision, I mean.
As to whether we mandate a particular diagnostic tool for folks to use?
I mean, there are
Dr.
very.
Can I just, so is there another question about park? I just need to be mindful of our time, and I know you need to go, but I also know this is a conversation we've had a few times before about OSSI's test is a end of year summative assessment. And the formative assessments that schools use, we've talked about, are up to the discretion of the LEAs. So it's not an OSSI discussion. That's what I guess. I'm
My
saying.
question has to do with finding out what you know, a student that starts out the year at 5th grade reading level, let's say he's in the 10th grade, and ends up at the end of the year to 9th grade reading level is below grade level. And it has jumped 4 grade levels, but is still below grade level.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, it seems simple to me that we ought to have a test at the beginning of the year. Every single school should test the students at the beginning of the year to find out where their grade levels.
Yeah, so this, I'll be quick. This does feel like a repeat of some of our previous conversations, but I would note a couple of things. We do include growth to proficiency as a measure and a metric that we look at, which does reflect some of the issues that you're describing, right? How was the student performing previously and how are they performing now? It's not within year, but it is year over year and measures progress toward proficiency. We also, when we test every year, which we did not do last year, have growth measures that help to eliminate that as well. I mean, the thing I would just say again, in terms of testing at the beginning of the year and testing at the end of the year, we noted that between 2018-19 and 21-22, we had a significant number of students who either tested for the first time or tested in 2018-19 and come back. And so one thing that we have to be mindful of as we think about changing up our assessment system more broadly is how does mobility in DC between schools have a meaningful impact, not only between schools, but out of district? How does it have a meaningful impact on how we can measure students' progress within a year? And that's something that a lot of states and jurisdictions are dealing with, and it's something that's especially true in a jurisdiction like ours that has the mobility that it does. So your point's well taken, especially from an instructional standpoint. That's information that's really important for schools to know, use, diagnose where students are. When I was a teacher and an administrator, we absolutely tested students on their grade level at the beginning of the year, and we hung our hats on how much growth they made. And also, I was insistent with my teachers that that improving 2 grade levels is good, and getting them 2 grade levels where we need to be. We owe these families the opportunity to have access to that kind of rigorous instruction.
Thank you.
So
Also, I think it's, Dr. Larry, we can talk about this too. I think it's the requirements under federal law as a recipient of Title I funds requires that we give annual assessments in certain grades, in certain subjects that are aligned to our state standards. It's not as in this sort of like, hey, a kid is in 10th grade, give them the 5th grade test. That would not be aligned with the law.
Vice President Thompson, I'm gonna give the last question to you.
So far, I'm thrilled that the effort that for, I'm looking on. Good, so I'm excited about it. My question is, so what help me level set my expectations for the money spent through the ESSER spend and budget season, like as we traditionally know. Like, what do you all expect to be like the intersection? Because I mean, it's coming, right? And people are gonna have questions about this, but they're not necessarily are the same as our annual.
Let me take a stab at what your question is.
Yes.
I'm not 100% sure, but I can speak from, past, like past. I think that we have to comply with a lot of oversight from the council, and we believe in providing tools that hopefully to the discourse that we're going to have within the tools that we provide. And we are prepared to answer questions about, also provide transparency about the range in which some of those are spending, depending on what. We've been answering those types of questions for the past. As far as how that will inform the budget, I think that I would expect people to be concerned, like, why are we going to class funds, are you going to deploy funds in a certain way? That would be budget.
So would it be fair to say you expect conversation during oversight? But it's not necessary, like that is actually different from like our budgeting process, because these funds don't have to go through our budget. Like, so, when they're like presents for budget, these are a different set of funds altogether. And so I guess I'm trying to level set both the accountability and the public interaction with like understanding how these funds are spent down and where that is presented, since most people are used to just interacting with our annual budget cycle. Does that make sense?
A little bit,
Like, it's not gonna be part of those allocations we get when the mayor presents her budget and then like the council moves all the stuff around. This is not that.
in some ways it is, and yeah, like it is in our budget, like this money is reflected in our budget books. I'm
But it's not reflected in an individual school budget, so this is treated more like their Title I.
Individual school budget.
The Title II.
I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% sure. I would have to go back to school level. I know how it's just like what we have to deal with, which is very different from the school budget. I think that's a question that.
And it's probably gonna vary by area.
That probably would
So the two quick things, who is the recovery czar? Is it the office position or is it citywide position?
I don't, nickname her, so it's Sarah Martin. She's the senior advisor for recovery. She got advice. That office, who's the management staff for a number of years.
The awesome.
This is an awesome division.
But there's no like citywide, but like, there are a lot of dollars that came through COVID relief.
That's a lot.
Okay, second question. Yeah, but this position is not, okay, that's.
This is who is managing our.
And then, can you say that, or maybe you can send me an email, when you gave us the numbers around the gaps, like when you said the question we're gonna be asking, and it was a question I had, so I'm not gonna re-ask it. The question we should be asking is, did the gaps grow?
Yeah.
And like, I'm not gonna do the math in the charts. but could you either know that offhand, just restate that, or just send it to the email?
I'm happy to send them via email and or restate them,
Yeah.
but the gap grew 3 percentage points for, the gap between Black African American students and white students, and grew 5 percentage points for the gap between Hispanic Latino students and white students. 58 to 61 percentage points, and then, I'm forgetting the Hispanic Latino white gap, but I can confirm, feel free to send, that in email and I'll put it right for you.
What's that one? What's that one for eight?
I'm not recalling offhand what the gap for Asian students is, so I would have to go back.
I want to thank Ozzy for all the time. And I thank my colleagues for bearing with the question. You know, we all have a lot of questions, but we've spent 2 hours and 23 minutes now, and we still have some substantive work on behalf of the board that we've got to get to. And I am concerned that we're losing members as the evening goes on. I know we are losing members. One thing I want to say to the group while Ozzy is here, if you have not yet looked at the OSSI ESSER dashboard, it's at ossi.bc.gov/recovery. There's actually an interactive dashboard where you can go and look at the statewide allocation of recovery dollars. You can look at it broken down into different categories of spending. You can look at it by individual LEA, what their allocation is, how much they've spent, and how it plays out in different categories. The thing that I think is most interesting is that there are 3 buckets of ESSER funds. One of them has to be spent down by this September, so roughly like 20 some days from now. And there is still about $4 million that was not present on this dashboard yet, that has not been spent down. So that has to be not just obligated, but also liquidated by that point. Is that right? Just obligated.
I believe it's obligated to
Okay.
one, but let's not get out over our skis.
Fair enough. So worth looking to see that there's still money that schools have from that first half, but there's a lot of money that schools have at hand. So I appreciate Representative Walker's question. I do hope that we can have a point at some, especially at some point with the board, about how this money is actually being spent in schools and what the efficacy of those dollars is from the research partners that you're working with. That would be great. But I also want all of us to be mindful of the LEAs and our individual wards and touching base with them on like, how is their spending going? Are there ways in which they're finding it challenging? So that we can also voice that at our meetings and bring that back to OSSI as part of the discussion.
This is also not a real-time feed, like they're reporting and information and spending is always coming, I think I can understand.
But we're. like,
But it's a lot of information, but just
Okay.
caution, you may get an answer of we're trying our best. Gotta be fair to everyone.
Thank you, Ozzy. Have a wonderful evening. All right, colleagues, we are moving along, and I'm gonna turn back to Mr. Dew to lead us in another discussion. We're gonna speak specifically about the state board's FY24 budget and our enhancement requests. So the state board started this discussion with the August 3rd working session, and Mr. Dew has some updates to provide. He's continuing to work with our sister offices, the Office of Ombudsman and the Office of Student Advocate, to develop our initial need for appropriations for FY24. Our hope is to vote on that need for appropriations and associated enhancements at our in-person September 21st public meeting.
Thank you, members. I will try to make this brief, as I know we're behind on time. So there are 2 documents that are before you. Both are draft in nature, as President Sutter said, they are really tiny. I'm largely going to draw your attention to the Form 2 summary that has a list of enhancement requests for the state board that I think we'll be making for fiscal year 24. I heard from some members, I also recall the discussion we had at the last work session. But there are 5 enhancement requests that are listed on this table for the state board's office. And then there are 2 enhancement requests for both the ombudsman and the OSA office that are listed here. I quickly just like the members know what the enhancement requests that I think we should be making as an agency for the state board are. based on what I've heard. So the first is for a community engagement person. I think we talked about what can be done with an additional FTE to help us do community engagement work in and around the city. The second enhancement request is for additional administrative support for the agency. That is largely related to a very growing staff and capacity across both the state board, the ombudsman, and the student advocate's office. So this person would help to do administrative support across all offices. The third is related to our old council chamber. I think it would be in the agency's best interest to request some funds to do a proper kind of professional redesign and complete reconfiguration of the space. To date, previous kind of things have been done very ad hoc, and I think it would be worthy of our time to really invest in that. The fourth thing is also related to our community engagement and the boards. We are fortunate that DC Council did include a public engagement fund for members of the state board, which I think came out to be about $1,000 per member for a year, which is nice. But I have added in a slight increase for those funds for FY24 as well as through FY27. And then the final thing is related to the state board's office, Office of the Ombudsman, and Office of the Student Advocate. This is an enhanced request that has been on here previously, but it's just related to our general office space to make sure that offices of our three offices are conducive to our work. So those are the 5 enhancement requests that I'm kind of proposing. I welcome feedback. It doesn't need to happen right now. Take it offline, but I just wanted to that might be had. And then the last 4 things listed are related to the ombudsman and the OSA enhancement requests.
I was gonna say, you need to.
No, I think it's fine. We can be informal. Vice President Thompson or.
Super quick, I think is, I forgot about our $1,000.
Yeah.
Do we need to spend that this fiscal year?
No, so that is the current, that new $1,000 will not come online until fiscal year 23. And so in your case for Ward 1, we'll have to figure out a way that we can allocate at least a fourth of those funds for you, and then potentially with 3/4 remaining for your.
Just for clarity, there come, the way I'm reading it, business change. Every business ain't got what it used to be before.
No, there are some changes. So there are new things that are listed that were not in previous years. An administrative support person that has not been previously asked for. That is a new addition.
Oh, no.
Okay, sorry.
We presented to this board. What's that?
This is a new table. It is new. The table that the board saw at the last work session was a copy of the FY23 request.
Yeah.
With some like annotations of things that we had already received. So this is new. There is some new information. And those new things are the administrative support person, as well as things related to our public meeting space.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Bernstein.
I have a question, and it does relate to the personnel services, but I think it could also be related to enhancement requests, so I just wanted to check. The personnel services, this is like a few questions. The personnel services include the money for the stipend that student representatives get, right?
So this is on are you looking?
I know I'm on a separate page. I'm hoping to ask a question now because it might relate to this one, or should I wait?
Why don't you ask your other question and we'll see if they.
Okay. Well, I guess it depends on the first answer to the question.
Yeah.
Is the student representative stipend out of the personnel services?
It's actually another line item.
Okay, then never mind.
Okay. I will note one thing that this might be tied into something that Representative Bernstein was suggesting, is for the public engagement fund. The $9,000 that's currently available is for our elected members. In this enhancement, one thing that I made the decision to do was add in some money, an allocation for our student representatives to be able to have, I guess, public engagement funds of their own, so that they can utilize that for the work that they're doing. So that is something that I think. Representative Watford.
Yeah, so I have a hard time reading.
I know, I'm
this,
sorry.
But I think that there's not a piece on research.
There is not an enhancement request related to research. That is correct.
And the only amount, if I'm reading it right, in the budget is like 30 for everything, is that correct?
So in the budget, the second sheet related to contractual services that can be spent on research. At this time, there are basically two line items. Again, it's really difficult to read, and I apologize. And Roma Battle will correct me if I misspeak, but item 408 for professional service fees and contracts. That item can be used for contracts that are under $10,000. And then for items that are over $10,000, line item 409, which is that 30,000 that you're looking at, can be used for contracts over $10,000.
So I won't go into detail here about therefore how much is available research, but what I want to say is, I think it's so great that OSCE is now going to provide this public data on teacher retention. I think everybody here is aware of how much has gone into that, but what people may not be aware of is that prior to the state board doing research on this and really publicizing this, there was really no data out on teacher retention. And we would always hear from teachers, and in fact, from families, that teacher retention was a huge issue. And basically the agencies would say, no, that's not true. Look at how many effective teachers are being kept. That's the only thing they looked at. I say that because it's a huge plus that we were able to bring this kind of research to the public and then have this impact. And I think we shouldn't underestimate how much we can influence things, have an impact on things, give people a voice by focusing and conducting research, whether it's polling research or whether it's the kind of research done on teacher retention. So without saying right here what number it should be and where it should be, I just think it's really important for us to do that. And
I was this one, I'm sorry for one thing. So I will say again, it's my understanding, so between those two line items, it's $130,000.
well then, okay,
It is my understanding that-
I'm not getting it right.
It is my understanding that we could in theory spend $130,000.
That's fine. Then my only thing would be to spend it.
Correct, and there's a question of spending.
That is exactly where.
Yeah, no, then I misunderstand.
The way that they're delineated is such that I think, based on procurement, I think if we can keep projects under $10,000, it's easier to spend the money, I think.
But I will say my experience is, but there are a bunch of things you can't do. So I'll just leave it
That's all.
for now and maybe we can have a fuller conversation.
But yeah,
Well, so let me just note this, when you say we can have a fuller conversation, this is what we would be voting on at the September 21st public meeting. This is our need for appropriations that we would vote on. So if there is more you'd like to say, we don't have time between now and that vote. This is what we're voting on.
So I guess my question is how much of that then is in that budget line that can be more than $10,000? Because I'm a little lost on this. So that's why I suggest maybe I would talk separately to Alex, like it should have written them or something. But that's really my question. How much money is available here for research that might be over the $10,000?
Okay, so that's something you'd like to follow up on with Alex and let us know about afterwards.
it is I can answer, so it's my understanding that $30,000 would be available, as I understand it, available for any contract over $10,000. Like if someone came to us and said, we have a bid for $30,000 to do research project X, the board is here, and with this.
I'll follow up separately with
Vice President Thompson.
Okay, two things that I think are important. I hope they add clarity. One, this little team table with the blue box at the top that is, I guess, a portrait view. this is additional money.
That's right.
that we will be asking. For. So that's one. So that's why the research money Representative Whiteberg is talking about is not here. Because we're not asking for more than what we've asked for. We chose to take the approach since the board has needed a lot of, it's had growing to try to go with like full-time FTEs that we'll get year over year, instead of like project line items that we may or may not get over, like we have to go to bat for every time. They just become part of the budget is our thing. Two, I don't, as I understand it, the contract line item, is going to be things like, so we're about to have this board governance presentation. We paid for a facilitator. That would be a contract. My assumption is the board will go through the process, just like we've done this year and just like we did last year, of committees presenting work plans and saying what they want to do. And then the stuff that they want to do is going to come out of the 2 line items that Alex is talking about. I am hesitant to say that all of that money is research money, because I don't think that's going to be. Is that wrong or is that wrong?
So I don't think anyone can determine what that money's gonna be.
I know that, no, I know that because we will go through the process as a board of
That's
saying, here's what we want to do. And then everybody will bid for their stuff.
And that board will be the board at the time in FY 24, which will be the folks who are on the board in October of 24.
I just want to be clear about, like, give as much insight into how, like, what's where, how we're thinking about it. And and be as transparent as I would know to be about how that money is categorized. That's all I got.
Further thoughts on this before we note that barring any amendments that are presented, this will be the need for appropriations that we will vote to adopt at our September public meeting. Representative Bernstein?
I have a thought, and I'm gonna be honest, this financial stuff is really difficult for me to follow, so, because I haven't, yeah, whatever, so. I have been thinking recently about the stipend that student representatives get. I understand we can't expand it by much, and I'm not sure exactly what the laws around that are, but I would like to push to expand the stipend of a student representative, not for this fiscal year, or not for whenever, between now and whenever the next student reps are elected, but for the next set of student representatives. And I'm not sure if that's a discussion that we need to have about these enhancement requests or about something separate. So I wanted to raise it now, and I understand it's kind of late. And I don't know how that would fall or what we would have to do to make that happen.
Interim Executive Director Ju, can you educate the board on the current status of stipends that are given to student representatives and how that was arrived at, as far as you know?
Yeah, so as far as I know, I don't know what the current bucket of funds is for. I will say that raises a valid question, because the bucket of funds was initially developed with only 2 student representatives. And so that fund would actually be split between 2. Now it's being split between. And so I do think there's value in using it. But it's about $700.
Unless mine was cut, mine might have been less because I had a shorter term. Mine was $575. Or mine is, I haven't received it, but
It's like 500. Yeah, I think that's right.
yeah,
Because there's short term. Student.
Yeah.
Like,
We had-
Sullivan too.
we had 6 student representatives.
So it's. But there's a pot of money, and due to the incoming and outgoing nature of some of the representatives.
And it comes out of a non-personal services. department.
And I don't know which one is.
Okay, and let us explore that a bit. Do you have a number in mind?
I don't, because 1, I don't know the laws. 2, I think it's hard to quantify because obviously the purpose of being a student representative is not for funds, but I will say that it does take a lot of time, a lot of like mental labor. And I know like students in Maryland or Montgomery County get a college scholarship, so it's increased, but it's not direct funds, and I don't know if that's for legal reasons or for whatever.
So it's like issued in the form of a college scholarship award as opposed to.
Yes, because legally, I think they're legally not allowed to pay their student members of the board. And I also know that there's only one student member of the board for like Montgomery County and for each of the counties in Maryland, so it might be a little different. I would love to talk to people about what that number might be, but like, I don't know anything about finances, so I wouldn't be able to say what that number should be.
Dr. Leary,
What committee would be making that decision?
I think that would go through the admin committee.
I don't know if the question, I think it's a better play. I'm assuming this would not be part of the compensation.
This would not compensate
No,
like.
no, no,
we
no,
do.
no. I'm trying to get the words out, but there's a compensation committee task or something that Councilmember Henderson proposed about like citywide electives.
Yes.
I'm gonna assume this would not be part of that review because we fund this out of our
Correct.
agency budget, is that right? Okay.
And also,
This is something
yeah.
that's gonna play.
And also the stipend for the student representative is not like.
Okay, that's what I'm.
It's something that I think at one point, and I probably will look to. Pay over time. In the state board's not.
So I'm gonna make an assumption that this line item where the student budget comes from is likely those same two categories, one of the same two categories that you identified where we could contract research. Because it's probably a line item that's allowable for stipends. Is my guess. So there's fungible funds in there that could be adjusted. Given whatever the interests of the board are at the time. So I don't know that I would think that we need to consider it an enhancement request, but I do think we should have a discussion. About how we compensate student representatives for their service on the board, whether the compensation has a clear annual set value, whether it's handed out in the form of a stipend via a check or something like a book award for school, like for college, or how we think about it. But I don't think it requires us to change anything for the enhancements based on what I'm hearing.
So
Does that sound right?
technically, yeah, you're right, and I'm gonna be honest in my approach to them. I would just ask for the money added as a line item, because it's not like we're overwhelmed with that. Like like if we have made the increase to 4 student reps, and we are going to say that, and we wanna reset, like, I think we should just have a line item that's for them, and to show our clear that it is, that would be my.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're able to in the chart of accounts is my concern. Like, I think it would have to be a promise or a statement made annually by the board that in our, let's call it professional service fees and contracts line, or our contractual services other line, that we are allocating X dollars annually to students.
And bring it in, so that we don't get a fall away, and we're gonna get that, we'll be mindful, but we can go with it.
That we put it in as an additional enhancement request, and we rank it where first over the community engagement.
I don't know, I guess. I don't have.
What are folks' thoughts on
I have about that far, but I don't know why we really just asked.
That we set the amount. Well, I guess honestly, my reason is we'd have to decide on it like tonight or over email between now and the public meeting. The admin committee has a meeting next week. We could talk about it at the admin committee. Any objection to that?
I will say, I think just by way of process, I think that we probably could go without making an answer request and just augment over our existing FY.
That's what I was gonna ask, if I could like
In the need.
put it into
Yeah,
resolution.
they don't need for.
Not ask for any enhancement,
Yeah.
just ask for it in the need for.
Correct, just like add the 2,000. And I will say, I just asked Roma, who is watching and participating, so thank you. That I think there's a line item that's for $2,000 for stipend.
In total.
In total, and given that there were 4 student representatives last year, that stipend value had to be divided amongst a number. Whereas in the past, I mentioned it's probably $1,000.
And then, can you remind me, the fiscal year goes from when to when? So the fiscal year 2024 is from,
October 1st, 2023 to September 30th, 2020.
so would it make sense to put this into resolutional wording as like an amendment to something? And then vote on it that way?
So I think we will put it into, when we do our need for appropriations and we vote on it, we can absolutely put into the resolution that one of the things we've added is an
Okay.
increase to the student representatives.
But we don't need to do anything.
We don't have to do anything to amend anything at this point, because we haven't read the. But we can make sure it's written in there. Okay, so it sounds like then we should put it in the need for appropriations. We don't have to treat it as an enhancement. We can. Go ahead with that, and we appreciate you raising it, Representative Bernstein. Mr. Drew, I apologize. I got this.
No,
Are
no,
there
I think that's, I think
other thoughts here?
largely everything. I think the other thing is just, the other tiny sheet is actually our need for appropriations, and I would say like Thompson for delineating the difference between the enhancement and the need for appropriations. In the yellow and orange lines, you will see increases for both our personnel and non. Moving along.
Okay, thank you all for the discussion. On the need for appropriations for FY 24 and the associated enhancements, members, I imagine we will continue to share additional information via email. We'll have a conversation in the admin committee about stipends prior to our September 21st public meeting. We're now moving to committee reports. Each committee chair or co-chairs will have no more than 2 minutes to quickly report. For committees presenting at the September 24th back to school event, please do share a quick overview of your planned session. I will say, I note that both Representative Chang and Representative O'Leary have left. So I don't know if we have any staff reports on either of those committees. Otherwise, we'll simply skip over teacher practice and school support and education standards for tonight. So we'll go ahead and start with our student advisory committee if there is anything to report.
Okay, so normally we do committee reports at every working session. We haven't done this yet. That just explains what the committee has done. We as a committee have not met since like July. But the only committee report is that we sworn 3 new student representatives and 1 returning representative.
Very exciting. And you'll keep members apprised of your new meeting times.
Of course, oh, we're meeting every Monday. The second month, no, not every Monday. Oh my God. No, we are not meeting every Monday. This, exactly. We're meeting the second Monday of every month in person from either 5 to 6:30 or 5:30 to 7 at this building.
Great. We will look forward to hearing that. Accountability and assessments.
Thank my partner for writing this up real quick for it. I'll read this one. The August meeting, a committee will be presenting at the fall engagement session. We'll be sharing information about where things are in the process of revising the accountability framework and getting input on stakeholder education recommendations for revisions to report card displaying content. The AA committee had a session on exploring inclusion of school climate metrics as a DC accountability system accepted at the 2022 NASB conference. We will present at the conference in Phoenix in October, and our next meeting is this Friday at 10 a.m.
Awesome. We are looking forward to the committee meeting, to the presentation on the 24th, and congratulations on the presentation on school climate. It'll be very exciting for everyone. Admin committee.
We're gonna forego a report, given we just had the budget enhancement conversation, and all of the members got an update about the.
Excellent. I will also just say to the members, I owe members additional information on our candidates as well as some draft questions for the interview. So please look out for those in your inbox. I hope to get some today. Advocacy and outreach, Dr. Reed is not here. Any updates for that committee?
So I am meeting for Dr. Reed. The advocacy and outreach committee will be presenting at the fall engagement session as well. And this session is related to family experience with engagement in their children's schools and review of the standards for family engagement. The committee will receive feedback from families and and extend an opportunity for deeper engagement on this topic. And the committee will be hosting a roundtable on sexual assault in schools on Friday, September 23rd from 10 to 12 p.m. Several agency and community partners have confirmed their attendance.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gasso. I'm excited for the roundtable. I imagine we're going to learn a lot and have a lot of questions coming out of that. Great. Let's present to the Board Governance Committee. Vice President Thompson will have 30 minutes for her report. Are we joined by our colleague?
I think she's on her way, so I will give a quick education standards update in the interim,
Oh, okay.
just on behalf of Representative Chang. Or unless Representative Bernstein would like to get.
No, that's okay.
So just real quick, I know that for the board governor, for the Education Standards Committee, they are going to be working on at the back to school event, having members of the public review 2 draft one-pagers on literacy, one that's going to be teacher focused and one that's going to be family focused, and also asking members of the public for input on how they would like to be engaged in the standards.
Great.
One more thing.
Yes.
Giselle, who works with the Education Standards Committee left, so that's it. We just want her.
Yes,
That's correct. Yeah.
we do. Thank you very much, Mr. Pugh and Representative Bernstein for that report. So I'm going to turn to Vice President Thompson, who will lead the Board Governance Committee report. We are joined by Dr. Is it Aisha? Aisha Keisler. Dr. Aisha Keisler of Keisler Social and Behavioral Research. And the committee has substantive matters to share with members this evening, so we're looking forward to it.
So Representative Thompson is one of the way of that. You give it to somebody else. Deference, delegation, I'm delegating to the people who really got us to this point, which are Dr. Fleischer on our staff and Dr. Casper. We do have substantive updates to share, especially around the focus groups and the survey. We want to make sure the board hears what we hear as far as how people, what people told us. And headline, we want to share this with the board because we will be also presenting at the qualification session and getting feedback from people around some takeaways from what we've heard thus far. So I would say more in terms of feedback.
There, yeah, please. We have and we also have printouts too, if you recall theirs.
It's okay, it's okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
All right, hello, everyone. Again, my name is Aisha Keisler. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to try not to keep you too long. I know it's getting late. So I run a small company here in the district called Keisler Social and Behavioral Research. We were contracted by the state board to conduct some qualitative research with parents and caregivers in DC regarding some of the entities that are involved in education leadership in the district. So we conducted these focus groups last month. The data is very hot off the press. And I'm excited to share some of the larger takeaways with you. We have a full written report, which goes into some of the more details. And as I go, please feel free to stop with any questions. I'm going to give a very kind of high level view, but happy to dig down into some of the details. Great. So the aim of our study, as specified by the state board, was to do a deep dive into stakeholder experience with the DC education system. Obviously, it's a very large topic. We were diving into 2 specific questions. One, how do stakeholders, and when I say stakeholders, I really mean parents and caregivers for the most part, but not entirely, How do they experience, navigate, and interact with the various entities in the district that are part of the education leadership system? I'll specify what some of those entities and organizations are, but we're really talking about, government level entities here. So we want to know kind of just what the lived experience is as a parent or a caregiver in the district, how they navigate these systems and what they know about these systems and what these entities. We also wanted to solicit feedback and insights from parents and caregivers about how we might improve education governance in DC, and specifically that interface between parents and caregivers and those entities. So I'll give you a brief overview of our study methods first. So this was a qualitative research study, meaning that we were getting qualitative insights from our participants. We weren't collecting, quantitative data. I know Darren had sent out a survey, and that's kind of the quantitative arm. This is the qualitative arm. We conducted a series of focus groups as well as one-on-one interviews. The initial idea was really to make it about the focus groups because you really benefit from people engaging with each other, the parents talking to one another. But we were kind of doing them also in a small window, and we wanted to not lose some of the participants. So rather than just say, oh, if you can't make one of our 2 focus groups, we're not going to include you, we also did some one-on-one interviews. But there's no kind of like research method other than that of why some are interviews and some are focus groups. And in the end, we just collapsed all the data. So we conducted 2 in-person focus groups at my office, which is in downtown DC, in a conference room. I moderated both the focus groups. Each one lasted from 2.5 hours. I would definitely say from the later end of that. One focus group ended up being kind of quite small, actually. It was a night that there was a lot of storms and flood advisories and everyone was calling in. That's why we ended up shifting those people to one-on-one interviews. The second focus group had a more robust group. It was 9 participants, a lot of really good conversation. So again, for people who weren't able to make one of the focus groups, we wanted to capture their insights as well, although they couldn't, make this session. We did one-on-one phone interviews with some of those folks. These would be anywhere from 15 to 30-minute one-on-one interviews. We also included, we wanted to make sure that we heard from some of our Spanish-speaking residents. So we had 5, we had a Spanish-speaking interviewer interview some of the Spanish-speaking residents. And then 3 of those one-on-ones were in English. Now, the questions we asked and the way that we formatted the discussion was identical between focus groups and interviews. We just used the same discussion guide. Okay. Any questions just kind of on what the setup was or the approach?
Curious what the outreach was and like, how did you do outreach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, in fact, I think that'll be on the next one.
Okay, sorry.
Yes. Let me just make sure that I'm going to cover that in a second. That is really important. Yep, it is. Okay, so 2 slides. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that moderator guide. The moderator guide is basically the discussion guide of the questions that we asked participants. It was framed to really follow up on the survey that the state board had already conducted. So basically kind of following up on some of the themes and getting more qualitative insights around those questions. So we had 4 main buckets of questions that we talked about. First, we asked them about their knowledge and awareness about the DC education system itself. Do you know who the State Board of Education is? That kind of thing. Then we asked them what their top level concerns were related to education. Then the 2 sections that took up the most of the time were actually their perceptions and experiences with the DC education system. And so again, when I say this, I really mean the interface as a parent or a caregiver with these different entities and agencies. I know a lot of stuff can be covered under these umbrellas. And then finally, what they would do to improve them. How could they, as parents, feel like they had kind of better access to these entities, have their voice heard more? What can these entities do? What can the community do? Okay, so now we'll talk about the outreach. So the study recruitment was a convenient sample, and by that I mean, as is always the case in qualitative research, this doesn't necessarily represent demographically the DC parent caregiver population. Rather, it was a very intentional recruitment based on some target pockets of the population that we wanted to make sure were included so that we could hear their voices. So most of the participants came from the survey that that Darren and team had conducted. So he was able to get consent to be contacted again, and that way we had a nice kind of profile of each of those people in terms of like, where they live, that kind of thing, that we were able to do our targeted, so we were able to do a targeted recruitment, or Darren was able to do targeted recruitment. So he intentionally kind of selected individuals from that population, so that he would get a representation of wards of caregivers and parents that had kids in the DCPS and charter schools, that used different services that are provided, so language services, 504 plans, et cetera, age in school, race and primary language. So that was the goal in terms of representation. And then I'll just give you a very quick, on the next slide, just a very quick snapshot. We have some tables of data, but I'm just going to give you the very top level view, which is that, again, we had 21 participants. That's not a huge sample by any means. But of those 22, 17 were current DC parents and caregivers or guardians. The remaining few were maybe in kind of a secondary caregiving role, so a grandparent who was like very involved with their child. We had one person who was a foster parent, and so she didn't at the time have a foster child with her, but she has over the years, and she's very engaged. Yeah, people that were in kind of various other roles that they're engaged. We had people, again, like Darren made sure that he got people that were using some of the services that are offered, so that we could make sure that we understood that experience. And we made sure that we had people for whom Spanish is their primary language. So we had someone from all wards except Ward 2, unfortunately. We almost got a couple from Ward 2, but we did not end up getting them. But otherwise, we had, I think, a pretty good representation on age, race, the school types, and the levels. One thing that actually kind of surprised me is that there were more kind of older folks than I kind of originally anticipated. I think just with the number of multi-generational households in DC, we had a good number of grandparents and, and our foster mom also. That, they weren't that kind of like, 30-something parents. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the kind of key findings and takeaways. Look, there's other questions about the methods and stuff. Okay, so our first kind of bucket of questions was asking people what their main issues and concerns were related to education. And this is an enormous question to ask people. Some of our participants, I mean, the great thing is that everyone was very engaged. Some of them actually came with like written notes of things that they wanted to make sure that they said. And so when we asked about these concerns, we got, everything from school transportation and, food that is served, obviously safety. The pandemic was, of course, a huge one. So basically, every concern you can think about was probably voiced, but I will say that there was absolute unanimous concern in this the category that we'll call student mental health and social emotional and behavioral kind of learning. And so I would say that like out of those 22, almost all of them agreed that this was like one of their top concerns. And then their other concerns could be any of these other things, but that was by far and away the most large one. And what we mean by that is a lot of things actually. And so there's concern, of course, about the pandemic and just kind of the cumulative trauma that has that everyone has endured and kind of going back to school and in and out of school, bullying, just kids getting along and just and behavioral issues. But that was really the top concern. I note that number 2 is the quality of the education and the curriculum, but it's really big distance between those things in the participants that we talked to. They're really thinking about like, the kind of the day-to-day kind of quality of life, so to speak, of like their kids in the school, are their kids safe? Are their kids, feeling safe and feeling secure where they're going each day? So we kind of wrap that up with one participant here who said that she thinks that social emotional issues are across the board her main concern because, as I said, the pandemic, the deficit in terms of civility and kindness and talking appropriately to your peers. And some mentioned like the way that teachers might talk to students too, racial issues were brought up, and how to handle when you're frustrated, when you're angry, when you're disappointed. The kids are lacking this and they need the support. So other than those issues, like I said, there was kind of like a huge diversity in issues, but those were the really big ones. We then asked the participants about their awareness of the various agencies and entities within DC. These were, government entities within DC I had a list of, I think it was 8 organizations that we listed. So the state board, OSSI, DCPS, PCBB, sorry, PCSB, the Office of the Ombudsman, you know, we listed all these agencies. We asked people if they're familiar with them. Really, people were like, yes, OSSI, we know who that is. The rest were kind of a question mark. And I will say that these were, as you could probably guess, these were highly engaged parents and caregivers. These are the ones that are, you know, they came because they had probably done the survey. Most of them had done the survey, or they're involved in some other organization. So there are people here that were from advocacy groups and just, you know, all kinds of things. People that have kind of, you know, gone and talked to councils about issues. And across the board, it was just a lot of, yeah, I know who OSSI is. And then it kind of ended there. And they know the names of DCPS and PCS. When it came to exactly kind of who does what, that was really a big question mark for people as well. They recognized those names. Now, when we got down to, say, the Office of the Ombudsman, the Office of the Student Advocate, and even the State Board, there was, even then, there wasn't even as much kind of name recognition. It was just kind of like, oh, there is such an office. I didn't know that. And yeah, but actually a lot of interest though, in kind of in finding out these things. So everybody wanted to know, oh, there's an Office of the Ombudsman, there's an Office of the Student Advocate. What should they be doing? So yeah, so really awareness was low among our, I would say, probably the highest awareness group of DC residents and of DC parents and caregivers. And I think this quote kind of summed it up. We don't know who these people are and what their roles are and who we should reach out to when we have an issue. And everyone kind of was just nodding their heads when somebody said that. So I'll go on to the next one, because then we want to talk about, yeah. So when parents talk about these different entities and agencies, we ask them, have you ever had to engage with any of these? And so there was a good number of parents, you know, of this very active group, of course, that had gone to DCPS or gone to OSSI. And I think the theme that emerged was that there was a lot of experiences of kind of running between the triangle of the school, of DCPS, and then of OSSI or the charter school board. Those 3 entities, the parents that were really engaged and like really involved and really advocating for the kids, they did reach out to these agencies, but they repeatedly kind of reported kind of pinging around to them and A, not knowing who they should be going to, but then B, getting referred to other agencies once they did try to reach out. So when we talk to parents about what could be done better and how we can improve, there was really kind of a couple different clusters that emerged. One was they want to know this information. They want to know who all these organizations are and who's in charge of what and what the policy making is, all that kind of thing. They are aware that information is out there. They know that there's websites and things. I think one way that we capitulated it in the report was to say that there's kind of information diffusion, which is to say that they know there's a lot of information out there and they get overwhelmed by all the different sources of information that they know that they can go. And so they might start at one website and kind of go to another, and then they're a bit overwhelmed. So I don't think that they're saying that there's no information. They're really saying there's so much information, I don't know how to navigate it. So what they're really asking for was a more streamlined approach to communication. And by communication, I mean just kind of updates on policy issues that are coming up, to changes, you know, in procedures and policies, procedures. But I really want to emphasize that they want it to be more streamlined. They feel like they're getting emails and notices from lots of different entities, and it's kind of hard to keep track of it all. They like the opportunity to get feedback and they want more of that. But they do want to know, there was definitely a voice, multiple voices saying, I've given feedback before and I don't know what happens to it. So what multiple people wanted was to know what happens after they attend a focus group, do a survey, go to a meeting and, you know, submit statements, you know, things like that. And so there was kind of a feeling of like, you know, it's easy to get discouraged because I've been going to these meetings, but I don't know what happens after that, if they're going to take action or they're not. So some of the specifics were more about, you know, having a centralized place to receive information. And that varied a lot between the ages. So some of our older participants were like, I'm not gonna look at your Twitter, you need to send me things in the mail. And everybody across the board, all ages wanted that information to be at the school. Because they're like, we go to the school, that's where we need the information. The younger people did, they thought, just send it to me, just text it to me, just put it on Twitter, so I don't have to keep track of mailings and things like that. So definitely like a multi-pronged approach, I would say, is what they really want. And they do want more opportunities to interface with the state board and other entities. But again, they really want some, as they say, like kind of accountability and follow through. So knowing what's going on after they engage in these activities. Some other kind of suggestions that came up were creating a parent office where they can, kind of give their opinions, they can have forums, that kind of thing, get information. But the idea of, and this wasn't the term used, but like a one-stop shop is really what people were circulating around. Again, to kind of get away from that information diffusion and to have like one centralized, portal office, whatever it may be. There was concern about their kind of co-parents, other parents that aren't typically represented. And they were very aware of the fact that, like, I'm an engaged parent, I have time to come to these things, but I know my neighbors aren't. And so what's happening to them? And as I said, I think multiple formats and forums for these types of engagement would be appropriate. Some people are like, I really want to go in person. Some people want to, in fact, they do just, tweet to Aussie or something like that to voice their opinion. And just to wrap up, yeah, people, obviously we had a lot of questions, but like, well, who exactly is the state board? I think this quote, I'm just going to wrap up with this one quote, but I think it reflected a lot of sentiment that, so they want the state board to be kind of like at community events, or like, well, we vote for these people, they're for our ward, like I should see them around the ward. They need to be out where people are so we can meet them and get to know them. Like, who are they? We don't know them. We voted, but we don't know who we voted for. We know their names and that they had some posters up, but who are they really? So they just really want to, and then people were talking like, oh, they should be at like the community center down the street and that kind of thing. They want to see them, I think, is the consensus. So that's my quick run through, but I'm happy to answer some follow-up questions. Before 15 on the dot.
I actually don't have a question. Sure. But I just want to say that was good.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
That was really interesting.
I'm glad.
I have a clarifying question about at one point you were saying that parents were saying they wanted a centralized way of engaging, but then also they want, I guess there's a difference between the space and the formats, right? So you were saying they want multiple formats for engaging. They would like to have like a single, as opposed to like, and I guess what I'm asking is, so right now we have like the chancellor's cabinet and we have the advisory board. We're considering having an advisory board, like that what they're saying, they don't want that as much as they want like maybe the education forum that speaks to all of the agencies.
I think that, yeah, I think the latter. Yeah. They want kind of that one-stop shop where they can speak to you guys. I think it's hard for them to like know when they have a concern or an idea or whatever the case, or have a question to know who to ask that question of. And so just kind of having like, I have a question about BC education, put it out there and then it gets paneled, whatever.
We need like a position in our system, like the operator, basically.
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, some of them. I said, or we can change the amount of plugins we have. I mean, one of the folks you did read was on the presentation. And I gave my slides
I didn't read the one about I participate and get feedback, but then we don't know what happens. Is that?
No, it was like a black box. But
it was a black box.
About
it requires advocacy and
about requires a lot of advocacy, tenacity, and work for maybe.
There was that one, and then there was. When we didn't have a local, when we don't have a local board.
Yes, 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 yes. That was actually talked about a good bit. It's, but, you know, again, by some of our older participants. We're like, oh, I remember when, and there's a lot of kind of in talking among kind of like the cluster of older participants, like back when it was it was like this and this and this. And I think I was mentioning that to Alex, as you put a comment on this in the report, and I don't know if some of this is nostalgia bias, but there is a sentiment that like, oh, back when, then we got to talk to our board members more easily, then we knew what was going on, you know, that kind of thing.
So a lot of the survey, a lot of the questions were really about, as you described it upfront, it's about their interactions. It's not really about how or if you'd like to have more say. But that interaction around the old school board really is about people talking about they want more say.
Yeah.
So can you say
Yeah.
more about that as opposed to just, wow, there's so much to learn and there's so much to know?
Right. So yes, you're definitely right that when we ask them about interfacing, those interfaces are things where they're trying to have a say. So they're trying to have a say, you know, it's usually like almost exclusively kind of exclusively about their, you know, particular student, but it is kind of about like the transportation processes, about, you know, their 504, that kind of thing. So those interfaces are them trying to have a say, I think, because they're trying to have a say, you know, about whatever that process is. But they're not sure how to go about kind of the bigger picture, have a say, the way that you would like go to a council meeting or something like that. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of like, I would like to kind of have the bigger bullhorn, but I don't even know how I would do that, like where the bullhorn is and where I should speak.
And when when the older participants talked about that, was there a resonance with the younger ones who weren't familiar with it, or not so much?
But so, yeah, so the younger ones weren't familiar with it, but they were kind of like, oh, that sounds nice. That sounds like how it ought to be or something, you know? And again, like, I don't want to say anything, you know, I can't speak to like factually what, you know, the experiences were, but the reports were that like, you know, we used to have more involvement. Like I used to know the board members and we used to know what was going on and that kind of thing. And yeah.
I'm wondering if, did anyone mention anything about it, like, about that possibly being between the cluster, like we were in person and now we're online?
Did you say that again?
Did anyone mention they feel like disengaged from their board members? Did they mention anything about that being different from pre-COVID when we were more in person to now when we're online in that process? Because when
That's a
you
really
say
good
that,
question.
that makes me realize like when I was in second grade, I testified in front of the state board, like in person. I would not have done that if there was Zoom. I did not know state board existed.
Yeah. You know, opinion was really split because it's one of the questions that Darren specifically wanted us to ask about. One is that they seemed, when they said that like the state board, like it used to be this way, I think it was kind of independent of COVID. But in the sense that like COVID wouldn't have mattered about the way that the change that they're talking about. But I think when we were kind of asking them, like, would you want to do this virtually? Would you be comfortable? Would you want to go in person? They're totally split. There's the people who are like, I'm never going to get on Zoom, but she was just like, Charles Allen lives in my neighborhood, and so I'll just go to his door, you know. She wants to do the in-person stuff, and she goes, and this was a good number of people who were in that cluster of like, I want to go in person. I want that person to look me in the face and tell me you know. And then there are the people who are like, I don't have time for this. I need to Zoom it while I'm, you know, on my commute. So again, there's a real kind of just bifurcation of the population.
Thank you.
We wanted, no worries, we wanted to, we're trying to do our best as a committee, to think about like, how do we bring the board along with the information that's coming to the committee? We do also have, written reports that are both, and I will say it's split into two. So one is a report of the survey night. One is a report of the focus group findings. They are similar questions and they build on one another, but you get two reports. So please look at both. We will, again, like, that was this prepares us to think about like, all right, how do we think about the feedback we get at the fall engagement session? Because essentially our goal is to say, did we hear you correct? Because for a lot of people, we started with, aside from like the expert interviews, which are more like, you know, theoretical, ideological, all the things. We wanted these experiences to be more about how are people experiencing our system now? So that as we propose recommendations, as a board, they're actually solving problems, that people have. Not just the problems we think they have. So this is our, I guess, wrap up of the first set of engagement. We're looking forward to the second set of engagement. And giving some recommendations out before the
So Vice President Thompson, can you just tell us how you're planning, like what will members of the public get to engage with on September 24th?
Yeah, so, we are calling them takeaways, because we don't want anyone to be confused that the committee has made recommendations from the board, because people are used to hearing state board recommendations. All of the members have not signed off on the set of recommendations. We're not going to propose it. So, we will, go to, what do I call it? Follow up our takeaways. And we will say, hey, are these the things that, do these sound right to you? And or are there some other things? Either that aren't here, or are there ways you would like to see these issues addressed? Because it could also be possible that some of the issues didn't bubble up through either the survey or the post. We're literally going to blow up the takeaways and have people comment on them directly. And so then we will be able to come back and say, like, here's what we heard people say to the board.
So the second round, is that following up with the same folks, or is it another round collecting?
It'll be a little bit of both. So I think one of the things that I'll say is an assumption of mine, and I can be this way about things that I'm especially less either interested in or knowledgeable about. If you come to me and say something kind of like in theory, like governance isn't really a sexy topic, I might not have engaged with you the first go round. But if you come to me completely saying like, here are the things we think are the things, there are some people that will tune in and say, oh, you know what, I want to respond to that. So those would be new things. And we are totally looking forward to engagement from the folks who have already engaged. So we're hoping to grow our universe. So the answer is and, yes, and both. Both and, sorry. Does that answer your question? Representative Weicker.
So, question, I may just be confused. So originally we had talked about having some draft recommendations. So when you talk about takeaways, are they draft recommendations, but we call them
We are not,
takeaways, or there's some, where they're not that level?
this is a language change. You're not calling them recommendations because we do not, it literally is a change in the type.
I know.
Because I want us to be, and somebody brought this up, which I think is a good way. People are used to saying the board goes as a whole and make recommendations. We have never had a two-tier engagement process in this way, where we have taken something out to the public to get feedback on before it was out. So it's only a change in language so that nobody is like, well, these are the board's recommendations, even though they're draft, but people not gonna pay attention to the draft, that, you know, I'm trying to be respectful of all this talk.
But they're like ideas or specific things like we should do, you know, the city should do X, Y, Z. Or this, okay.
They're gonna.
So we're gonna be working on those.
Right, that was gonna be my question, because I read through this packet and there are 60 findings, but those are not the 6 takeaways that are shared with the public at the September 24th engagement. Or might they align with the 6 findings?
So the survey, right? So this is the focus group takeaway,
Right,
and this is the survey takeaway.
so what's,
So we have to package them both.
I see, okay, so the takeaways that'll be shared with the public will be some combination
Of
of
the two.
both of these.
And we wanted people, like, I think most people are familiar with, and we got a lot of this information at the committee level, and this is really easy to read through. You all are smart, y'all are familiar with like surveys, right, like, and how we do a bunch of surveys. We wanted to, take the time to explain how we approach the focus groups in particular. And share a lot more of the qualitative information, because the quantitative information is a little more straightforward. But you have both of these things, but they all go together. The other thing that Darren and I, have not gotten to, but we will do. We actually are supposed to have a special board governance meeting, to package and get ready for the qualification. Got it. But these things go together.
Yeah, and I would encourage if folks have not had a chance to look through this yet, to look through this and to send any feedback to the governance committee, because I think there's some very interesting things within the 6 key findings from the survey. Including the percentages of folks who responded for today. So like, the key finding 6 is particularly, I think, interesting to me, that there are some suggestions around improving the education system. And even the suggestion that received the highest percentage, only had 15% of people choose. So there's not a ton of agreement in a large number of people who participated in the survey about what needs to change.
The other thing I would say, and we of course make decisions in the interest of time. I highly recommend people to go back and look at the board governance committee meeting, because Darren and Susie gave a really good overview of the survey results. We of course were not going to possibly took up their hour and a half or whatever they took of our meeting. But we did let y'all, because we only had the survey results at that time. Susie, of course, is no longer in her position with us, but did a phenomenal job of compiling all the information. So literally take a look at Susie's presentation, because she does similar voiceover. Yes.
I just was also wondering in terms of, I'm looking at the respondent demographics and how different it is by ward.
What page is that?
Just saying.
Yeah, the initial table. I thought it was interesting at the end, Dr. Gusto, that they talked a little bit about the demographic comparisons on responses. I mean, do you talk about how different folks who responded differently to different questions? I have not gotten to watch the meeting, but I just do it. Sounds like it makes sense.
Oh, we do. We have a long conversation about this. So a couple of things that I feel like we said, but I think I work repetition. One, before we sent the survey out, we engaged the Office of Racial Equity to try our best to set up some goals and some metrics around who we wanted to engage. I want to be very clear that even at the overall, we wanted 2,000 responses. We didn't get 2,000 responses, but we got a very large number. So it was over 1,000 responses. It was very good. So, which super proud and really happy about. We did get 1,000 responses, and we were very clear about which demographics, what the demographic makeup of the responses were, and where we fell short of the goals we had set for ourselves in the Office of Racial Equity. So, for example, we wanted more responses from 5, 7, and 8 than we got, right? Fortunately, there's the good thing about having a really large sample. We have enough responses to disaggregate. So one of the things that I would say was particularly of interest to me is where Susie pulled out in Ward 8. One of the things we overwhelmingly see is people were concerned about food and bullying concerns, which is different than what we heard in a different word, right? So just being able to disaggregate, I think, is really important. And it's not in this presentation, but one of the things I really appreciate that Darren did was when we knew that we wanted heavier voice from not just from 5, 7, and 8, but also the people who were receiving services, grandparents, people whose first language is not English or lingual families. We purposefully chose overweighted those in the focus. So it's not by mistake that them represented in those 22 participants. We wanted to kind of overweight in that way. Yeah, so that's just a little bit of voiceover of how we did our best to, you know, do what we could with the resources we had.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And this is really interesting in my number.
Yeah. And we asked people, could we follow up with them, because the Office of Racial Equity said one of the interesting things about the findings, like when she was saying, like, people want to know what happens when they give you information. The Office of Racial Equity told us the same thing. They were like, people will be more inclined to participate if you say to them, we're gonna come back to you with this, which makes sense. And so it made sense for us, to go back to our participants, but we also promised them we will follow up and report out, so we can even like go back to these people who we've already asked for their permission and like invite them to our whole engagement. You know what I mean? Like, so they can, that's all the things. Excellent. So we didn't meet all of our goals. We still did really good work.
Well, thank you, Vice President Thompson, for the work you did. And Keithler for joining us and for the work you did on the focus groups and the individual interviews and the follow-up when folks couldn't make it because of storms. And to Darren and Susie for the intense amount of work that I'm sure went into the analysis of the survey results and the presentation for the board tonight. So thank you. We are now to the new business portion of our agenda. It is 8:33. Are there items of new business from members? I know several things were floated over email. There was discussion of board members' name of titles, bylines, and writing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, hold on a second. We also talked about, we also have an idea for a panel on September 21st, public meeting. We want to raise with folks, and Representative Wattenberg shared that she had 2 topics. So are there other topics besides those 4? Okay, the 5th topic. Okay, so let's discuss briefly. Is there any interest in discussing tonight the question about the use of titles by board members in writing, or is that something we'd like to discuss in a future working session? Happy to entertain the conversation tonight. I'm also mindful it's late and that may not be on folks' minds, so happy to go either way.
I would suggest doing a future meeting. I think it's something that's happening that we should.
Great. Is there any objection to us discussing at the October working session? Sure.
We also are missing.
We're missing a lot of members. Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna push that to our October working session for now, and we can see if we can drum up some conversation online. The second is about September 21st. Given the ESSER dollars spending conversation started tonight about the efficacy of those dollars, we thought it might be a good idea to have some folks who are looking at this nationally come speak to us on September 21st on a panel about how that money is being spent, what it might mean for DC right now. We thought about reaching out to folks from the Economics Lab at Georgetown because they're looking at this nationwide. We thought about inviting folks from the Ed Trust to come talk because they're also taking a look at it. We also thought about inviting Matt Barnum. I don't know if any of you follow his work. He's been a reporter for Chalkbeat, who just got I think a Spencer Fellowship to spend a year writing about finances in schools, specifically like what happens to school districts that were under-resourced before ESSER and will fall off a fiscal cliff. So he's got like a 1-year reporting fellowship. And he regularly wins awards for being like researchers' favorite journalist because he writes so thoughtfully about education research matters. I'm an unabashed fan girl, so. Are there other folks you think might be worth talking to about ESSER dollars that you'd recommend we reach out to?
The one other kind of person that I might recommend is somebody like from a place like University of Chicago or from Tony Bright's operation. Not to talk about ESSER per se, but to talk about the kinds of questions that should get asked at the school and district level. So we really come out of it with real understanding to take forward. And I'm especially interested, and this relates to my to the resolution I'm going to talk about later, is that so much of the ESSER is really about reading interventions, and there's so much we could be learning. So let's learn it.
So you're thinking like someone from the Chicago Consortium?
Yeah, or Tony Bright's operation out in at Stanford, I can't remember where, but researchers who look at that kind of thing. Sort of implementation research, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, no, that makes really good sense. Any other ideas on that?
People who might have some interest in work on this are like ERS, so like education research strategies. They started to put together more forward-looking work as far as turns around what districts and states can do around learning acceleration. We've been hearing that term a lot. Like, what does that mean? What can people be doing here? And I
will ask our staff to follow up with some of those great ideas. I will turn now to Representative Wattenberg for the two ideas you wanted to raise.
I will, but also somebody just suggested to me that we should have somebody who's a principal or a teacher on the panel from DC to talk about what has happened and hasn't happened and what they're looking forward to, which I think is a great idea.
Okay, I mean, I think it's worth us reaching out. I am also mindful of what Justin noted around people feeling pressured to try to spend the money right now.
No, but and not to talk about what they've spent it on, but sort of just have them help help us think about what they're thinking about.
Got it. Okay.
Not about the ethics.
Or maybe somebody not. I mean, I think the thing I'll say that I struggle with, because I have a work with a bunch of different LEAs, is like, even, it's not just about like one principal and one LEA, but like, the rules are just so different. And like,
The rules for ESSER spending or the rules?
spending, for like how they're gonna implement, how it's gonna hit, like, it's just so different. And so like, so like, and like some of my friends feel like they can't say stuff.
Yeah.
That's always on the table.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think too, the
but I think
flexibility that,
I think the local perspective is important. I'm just trying to think of other ways to get at it
Yeah.
without, you know. and
Yeah.
maybe we need to have some talk to school leaders offline, like without putting anybody on the spot, 'cause
I do think the local perspective matters though, so let's see what we can drum up. I'm sure. Okay, then I'm gonna pass it to Representative Wattenberg for your two ideas.
Okay, so the first one, I think the only one I'm actually gonna talk about tonight is the proposed resolution by the board that would go to the research practice partnership that would sort of outline our priorities for the research practice partnership. I talked with Carlene about it, with Representative Reed, who had gotten some ideas, including several on reading, as I understand it. And she's up here tonight, so we wanted to raise it. I talked also with Representative Chang about it. So what we put together is a resolution that basically says, let's really ask the RPP to look closely at the question of reading, early reading, and especially to look at the implementation, gets back to this implementation idea of the new council law that is putting a lot of money into early reading interventions, into screening, professional development and intervention. So it's a real opportunity to look at that rolling out and really learn from what's working. Insofar as things aren't working, you know, help people make the fixes, but in so far as it is working, really start to, you know, push around those ideas. So you all got a draft of that resolution today. Take a look at it. Any ideas for how to fix it, expand it, whatever, let me know. And my hope would be to bring it for adoption in September and then to pass it on to the RPP. And as I said in the email, it doesn't have to just be one thing. I focus on the reading because I know we are really a very united board on that. We put a lot of effort into it. It could be other things as well. I don't think it should be a laundry list. And it could also just be reading. So take a look and let me know.
Representative Wattenberg, I want to ask a clarifying question. Is there a reason you think it's important that it be a resolution? I ask this because the survey came out from the RPP that I know Carlene shared with members. And then I also got it from Jasmine Brand, who's the principal at Tyler, who's on the RPP advisory committee and is currently, I think, acting as chair. So I already completed a survey on it with what I think the RPP should study. It makes sense to me that the board put forth a united front on a board opinion on it. Is a resolution, you think, the right thing, or should we write a joint letter and send it to the RPP advisory committee?
I don't think it matters. I do think it matters to say something in the united voice of the board and have it voted on. And typically that's a resolution. It doesn't really matter to me either way. I don't think one or the other is better or worse. But we should vote on it, which we don't always do for letters. And I guess if everybody signs it, I guess it doesn't matter that much, but either way.
I'm wholly in favor of the board sending to the RPP a common statement of things that are in the voice of the board, really important for us that we want the RPP to take up. And I think reading makes really good sense on that. I'm just mindful of resolution versus letter.
I don't have an opinion on it. I will say this, the resolution is done. And that's a plus. But I am totally open to somebody either turning that into a letter, or writing a different letter, however, I just.
Okay. I will send that idea in an email in response to yours and just see where folks fall out once we hear from the many members who had.
I mean, I think what's important is what's useful to the RPP.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, and the second, you want me to do my second thing? Yeah, so the second thing, and I'm not gonna talk about it a lot today, partly I haven't fully thought about it, but partly it's late. Is just to think about rules, half of the board is leaving. And what are rules that we might want to propose and adopt that kind of institutionalize for future boards, what we have all learned in the time we've been on here. And I've been thinking about it a lot, partly because I'm getting ready to leave, but also because a couple of things have come up recently where I was like, oh, wow, I thought that was the practice. Well, actually, it was a practice for a period of time, but not maybe before that or after that or whatever. And so it's a way of, carrying on what we've learned to the next one. So I'm thinking about that, and I encourage other people to think about it. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about is how much time we spend on the public witness discussion. Because when I came in, I don't know if people know this, the board wasn't allowed to question, board members weren't allowed to question public witnesses. And we actually had a vote on it. We changed that rule. We adopted a new rule. We said board members can ask the witnesses questions. And of course, the result of that, we have these great conversations and people come and talk to us because there's a reason that there's engagement. So you want to keep that. And I know when I was president along with Marcus, there was just a lot of back and forth about how long should it be. I know you guys have had similar conversations. And I think it's worth getting a grasp on. Sometimes it's too much, sometimes it's too little. I think it's worth, as one example, putting that into some into a rule that will go forward. That's one example. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. But other people should think as well about what this should be, and I'll bring some specifics, maybe the October meeting, but others should as well.
I'd like to just respond to the notion that we have bylaws and there are elements of rules that we may want to include in bylaws, which does require a 2/3 vote by the board. There are other things like the amount of minutes that witnesses are given to speak that I think would not necessarily be appropriate for bylaws, and that I think we have to consider how would we create these rules? Where would they sit? What form would they take? So I am interested in this discussion, but I want to make sure we think thoroughly about like where they would live.
All fair.
And what procedures and processes would put in place for future board members to change them. That they need to, right? Because again, like in the bylaws, there is a statement to change the bylaws. Board, how would you change a rule if it lived somewhere outside the bylaws, and what document?
Do we not have rules that are different from the bylaws that are majority? Because I agree, I wouldn't
We
necessarily.
don't currently. The bylaws govern the board, is my understanding.
Vice President Thompson.
Okay, so having seen that, my initial reaction to this, is hesitant. Actually, for the following reasons. One, when I hear Representative Blackbird's example of the change going from, we weren't allowed to question witnesses to being able to question witnesses, the fact that you had to vote on that to change that, sounds ludicrous. And
I'm
so
sorry, I didn't hear the end of that.
I said, the fact that you all had to vote on that to change that, because a group before you imposed it on you, sounds ludicrous to me. And so I think that was absolutely, I think it was the right thing to do, and it was unfair to you all. That being said, I feel a bit uncomfortable with establishing rules to give to a largely new group of people who will be coming in. I think it totally makes sense to share some type of almost like institutional knowledge. And then people can choose what they adopt for themselves. But to say like, here's the rules, because we liked it this way as this group, to a largely new group, because we will have, what, four new members joining. That's a lot of new people. And I just feel like if I was new coming onto the board, I would want to be able to have input in that. I wouldn't want to have to work to change something that someone else established for me. But I would want to have the historical knowledge of what has worked well in the past. So I have a bit of a reaction to the roof part. And I see value in the passing on of information so people can make decisions, informed decisions for themselves. I don't know if that's helpful, but Dr. Patterson.
I definitely get what you're saying, right? And it goes back to like when I first came on, the person that I went to was John Paul. And because he held that institutional knowledge, and things like that, of how things work, or the minutes and things like that. And I think what you're saying, the Bird, should fall within that person who is going to be here, regardless of who the representatives are, as we change out, terms, things like that, and kind of, putting whatever the operations of how we operate as an organization and as a governing body with that person to kind of like say, okay, see, these are some of the policies of the norms that we practice over a course of time. That way, when you do have something that happens where you want to change and say, okay, we want to question now, people who come before us in panels and stuff like that, they can be made, and it's not like this big poll or anything like that, but you're actually talking to the person who posed that knowledge and say, okay, well, this is the changes that we want to make. It seems like everybody's in agreement with it, they can change, as opposed to making it so hard and so, unflexible and that type of thing.
So given what I'm hearing, it sounds like two things. It sounds like, one, this is a topic for further discussion, to think about information that is historic and common practices of the board, the way we've done things. And two, that it may be thought of in any number of ways. Maybe it's not rules, maybe it's a code of practices, maybe it's an orientation guide. Maybe this is a topic for a retreat in the fall that is already on the calendar, because it's a space where we don't have to take a vote, where we can discuss things and list them out. So thank you, Representative Wattenberg. We will keep this on the docket for further discussion.
And I just throw one extra thing into that. I don't disagree with everything that came there. One way to think about it is rules that are majority vote, not 2/3, because they shouldn't be that hard to change. I agree with you, but there may be a value in it. So just throwing that one out.
Yeah, I'm opposed to rules.
Yep. Thank you, Representative Wattenberg. Vice President Thompson.
Okay, so I don't have a resolution proposal or anything. So at the top of the meeting in the remarks, it was noted that we had a really rough start to the school year. I'm quite frankly at a loss because I literally had 2 shootings. The third day of school, 3 young people were shot, 1 young person was arrested. And I feel a bit at a loss. That's the mind, but like, yes, ribbon cutting's great, swearing to y'all, great. Back to school, all the things, amazing. And I feel a bit at a loss for what is the appropriate response. As far as like what, like if I had to explain to just another citizen, as far as like what people in my community should expect. As far as like safety, who's on first, second, third, who does what, I couldn't do it. And it's not all, and I keep hearing from people like either policing things or mental health things. And honestly, it's not one or the other of those things. There's a whole host of stuff in between. Some of that stuff actually started with the board. Like I think about like safe passage and like when I pulled up to Woodson at 9:30, it was students going into Woodson with me. And when I left Woodson, after swearing you in, it was still students coming into Woodson. That's beyond safe passage hours. And some of these incidents, even though these were safe passage sites, happened after safe passage. That's not to throw safe passage under the bus. That being said, whatever is happening is not enough. And so I am asking, I appreciate Representative Sutter and Representative Chang in pretty short order being like, we saw these things happen, we don't have a solution, but like if there's anything we can do, like let us know. Honestly, I'm at a loss for what to ask for. So I have had a conversation with the Deputy Mayor for Education, which I need to follow up on. And I'm gonna have a conversation, reach out to the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, because it is a whole host of things. But I wanted to bring it up because it's not like these things happen just in Ward 7. They're happening. And we probably care about them. And I know I don't have an answer for them as an individual, but I welcome, not right, like some, maybe there are some things right now, but I welcome any thoughts, solutions, wonderings about things we could do, should be asking for. Cause I literally just feel at a loss.
I'll say one thing. I've heard that at least in a couple of the violent incidents that started the year, that there were connections to children trying to come to school who for some reason or another were unable to enter their schools. There were policy issues or questions. And I wonder how we treat questions around how we keep our students as safe as possible while also honoring expectations and needs for children to go to school at certain times or be in school in certain ways, prepared with certain things. The other thing is that I'm understanding that some of these incidents also happened for students who had noted their own feelings of being unsafe and who did not get responses from any people empowered to change things for them in a timely fashion. So I think there are bigger system-wide issues, and then I think there are the very human issues of when a child arrives at a school, how are they welcomed? How are they cared for? What happens if it's all not right in the moment versus asking them to leave a school building? And then what happens when a child expresses fear? And how do we respond to that? Like what is immediately available to that student in the safe place that they've come to of their school to respond to that? Because I think those are system issues, but they're also then being implemented by individual adult people in individual school buildings. And I think there's often a disconnect in the way we talk about them. We talk about system solutions, we talk about individual student solutions, and we miss that even the system solutions have individual people who have to implement it right at every step of the process. I'm not sure all those people are being trained in the same thing.
But I also, I hear that, and I also expect, like when I think, the more I have thought about this, and I've thought about this a lot, at least in the last few days. Yeah. A lot of the conversations we have here are connected. We have conversations around attendance. We have conversations around children. We had our student representatives say to us, they're feeling, everything from health issues to things coming up with bullying to the increased emphasis, like all of it kind of goes together. And honestly, and the things, and there are things that are kind of outside of our space. Like I think about all the dollars that go to violence interrupters. I couldn't tell you the difference between what Peer Creek is supposed to be doing in the one's office and what that relationship is with schools. And I feel like there are certain intersections because we have done some good work around like safe passage and getting that set up. And like, where's the through line? Like, how do we connect the things so that the safety net is actually a net and not just like a random, you know what I mean?
So, first we had to go to a child on the third day of school as an administrator,
Like,
last year. I definitely feel your pain and empathize with you on that issue. I think one of the biggest things that we learned in this school year in the same location was that we were very much more coordinated. I think as a system, both of you guys have touched on that there is no coordination. That different people have authority over you. You have AG who does certain things about disruption. You have the executive branch that does a certain amount of stuff, and you have different groups and different agencies that, but none of them talk. And our young adults are smart enough to know to find the gaps through using their cell phones of how to coordinate things much better than the adults that are supposed to protect. And so the biggest thing that I found is that there has to be some, and Dr. Grant visited one of our schools on one of the first days of school. And when we sat down and talked to her after she did the presentation, we talked about this extensively. And she also said there is a coordination problem between agency, different groups of government that are not talking to each other, but they fund and overlapping of what people do. So I think when you ask that question of, okay, where's the through line?
Yeah.
That's exactly the problem. There has to be somebody who coordinates this for us because there are so many things that are out there that's supposed to protect children, but they do not talk to each other. And it does not make sense, and children take advantage of that we do not coordinate. Being a military person, communicate with them, and that does not happen. So I think one of the biggest things that we should do is to keep our children safe is to bring the adults into the room and say, okay, we have to learn how to talk to each other and share information, much like our government, our US government, in different agencies that does security. They have to talk, they have to communicate and coordinate on this and stuff like that. And I've just seen that we have yet to know how to do that. We just been saying, okay, this is the answer, and we go fund this, or this is the answer, let's go fund this group. And each person kind of stays away as long as the dollars are flowing to a particular group. We feel like we're answering the question, and that's not the answer.
Besides the deputy mayor for education, so we have our meeting with him on Tuesday. Else do you think?
It's a definitely from public safety, like that whole cluster,
Yes.
because I feel like people talk about policing, not realizing that that entire cluster has like, it has the ones off, right? Like it has, and a lot of times either people will say like, everybody pushes it all the different ways and like points at each other, and I can't, and so I'm just like, I don't have time for that. Like, it's the same thing, finding her and the focus is on education, that's true for public safety too. And I'm not a public safety expert, but I'm an expert in knowing when I'm getting suffered around and some food.
Could we follow up with the chairman and with Councilmember Allen? To see if we could do a joint committee hearing on this problem with coordination of student services, Brad's education and public
I'm
safety?
open to any solution, but what I know is
I'll reach out to Councilmember Allen.
over time, literally, stuff keeps happening that is not solidly in my state board of education, and I will take up space outside of traditional state board of education. But stuff keeps happening and no one even shows up to acknowledge that it's happening. Like I had 60 showcases outside of Susan and nobody even came.
And I heard about that they were to speak to.
Nobody even shows up to acknowledge. So, and I can't make that, right? It's nothing.
I think we get council involved personally. I think we ask for a hearing. It doesn't fix any of this, but it pushes the question. And I don't ask Councilmember Allen for much, so I'm very happy to ask him for this, given he's got the judiciary. I think we should also bring this up again in October, because I would like a very peaceful fall, but I don't suspect we're gonna get one. I mean, it's already been a bad thing. Yeah. Other thoughts on that?
Retreat, is that what you're getting at? To bring this up for retreat.
I'm thinking the October working session too, but I mean, I think pushing the council to do a hearing could also give each of us a chance to go testify, as well as to get students and others who want to go testify, the chance to testify about specific ways to connect things. And to not let the fact that multiple incidents happen in a week be a reason not to show up.
Normalize it.
Yeah. And we look at the test scores, and that's fine. They're terrible. We knew they would be, but
why would it?
why wouldn't they be? But why wouldn't they be? Anything else? We're at a very long table with very few people. All right. As a reminder to everyone who is still watching us, the state board has returned to an in-person posture for our meeting, so our next public meeting will be held in person on September 21st at 5:30 p.m. in the old council chambers that's on the first floor of this building, 441 4th Street Northwest. Seeing no further business before the state board, would entertain a motion to return. I have motions and seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays. Meeting of the state board is adjourned at 9:01 p.m.